CD7.
Friends. Raising an eyebrow, Connor placed both of their wine glasses on the coffee table, ran a hand down the curve of her thigh, and kissed her. Is that all this is, then? She smiled against his lips. I'm talking about the friends we'll be celebrating with tomorrow after graduating cooking school with flying colours, and Lauren and Fergus, who have basically moved in together and let me have the run of the place so I can fully acquaint myself with you, lover boy. He laughed, amused by April's nickname. Their transition from friends to lovers had been slow, almost cautious, adding a depth to their relationship. They'd steadily developed a comfortable routine. He worked alongside Lloyd for most of the day, and the afternoons he wasn't teaching piano were spent helping April renovate the stables and tidy Lacewing Estate. Their evenings were enjoyed at the winemaker's cottage, and much to Connor's surprise, he was settling into the quiet country lifestyle. Connor reached for his glass again. Righto. Here's cheers to good friends, bookings, and lovers. In fact, I'd go as far as to say I'm falling for you, April Lacey. Her grin was infectious, and Chardonnay slopped over the side of the wine glass as she returned the toast. I'll drink to that, she beamed. They arrived at Geraldine's to find the entrance festooned with balloons and streamers for the final cooking lesson. The day was a celebration of everything they'd made during the course, with each person assigned several different dishes, and Geraldine keeping her advice to the bare minimum, striding around the kitchen like a proud mother hen, ushering her chicks through the process with praise, encouragement, and a hefty dose of pride. Rupert Winkland could take a leaf from Geraldine's book, Connor thought, watching her sample April's muffin batter and declare it absolutely luscious. Several months had passed since his awkward conversation with Archie's father, and while the young boy's piano skills had improved greatly, his confidence still took a nosedive whenever Rupert walked into the music room. Connor recalled his nerves at the start of the cooking classes and how much he'd valued Geraldine's gentle guidance through the sessions. A good teacher focuses on the student, not the distractions. He resolved to channel his inner Geraldine from there on in, and turned his attention back to the festivities. The long table was set with a striped tablecloth, decorative placemats, napkins, and crockery, with flowers and candles in the middle of the table. In the corner of the room, a banner that read Happy Graduation hung alongside bunches of helium balloons clung to the ceiling. And as Geraldine launched into a speech about how far they'd come, how pleased she was for each of them, and how delighted she was to have been part of their journey, Connor felt April's hand clasp his under the table. It might have taken them a good decade or two longer than most people to embrace cooking, but it was the very first thing they'd started and finished together. Holy heck! How on earth is this thing so heavy? Panted Lloyd. Glad it's going downstairs and not in the bedroom. Nearly there, Dad, April said, hurrying to open the stable's double doors. Fergus, Connor, Lloyd, and Daniel lugged the small wood burner inside and manoeuvred it into place. Looks like it was made for this cottage, said Daniel. Exactly why I chose it, said April, admiring the way the wood fire's arched glass door mirrored the shape of the oak entryway. She led them through to the bathroom to wash up, then gave Fergus and Dan a quick tour, soaking up their effusive praise. It's come up well, she said, looping a hand through Connor's. But it's been a team effort. Gordo was a whiz, and this guy here played a starring role too. Connor lifted his palms. I was just the occasional lackey. You've done an amazing job. Too right she has. We couldn't be happier with how it's come up, Lloyd added, running a hand along the concrete benchtop. And as much as I hate to admit it, the cellar door and tasting room don't look half shabby either. They're not a bad pair, these two. Lloyd caught April's eye, giving a wink. Unlike the winery makeover and their involvement in the Destination SA food tourism program, her father hadn't voiced any reservations about her dating Connor. She was grateful for his quiet support. And as the renovation came to a close, she felt her confidence in the winery growing. The helpers dispersed when the plumber arrived to fit the flue and ensure the chimney drew nicely. "Now all that's left to do is collect the kindling and enjoy our first fire," said Connor, putting an arm around her waist.
"Sweet as. Sounds like I'm just in time."
April and Connor turned to see Archie outside the cottage, a packet of marshmallows in his arms.
"I'll get some sticks."
He returned with an armful of vine canes April had stacked in the tractor shed. "Oh, that's not kindling," she said. "Those are for the little fences in the new gardens." April steered Archie back outside and showing the knee-high border she'd built around the first garden by weaving the vine cuttings together.
"Wow, it's like knitting with sticks,"
Archie said, crouching down for a closer look.
"Can you teach me how to do it?"
There was rain forecast for the afternoon, and as keen as April was to see the new wood fire slowly warming the stables to the cosy nook she'd dreamed of for months, she couldn't resist Archie's enthusiasm. Plus, if she taught him how to help, they'd have the decorative fences built in half the time. Connor left them to it, and after collecting her tools, a mallet, a pair of secateurs, and a bundle of vine canes, April hefted up her builder's pants so the padded knees were in the right spot, and kneeled on the grass beside the herb garden. Archie listened carefully, then sorted through the canes.
"So we use the biggest sticks for the uprights and just weave the smaller sticks through like this?"
"Close, but not quite," she said, adjusting Archie's technique so the weaving was tighter and the longer lengths alternated with the shorter ones. "This way's a little sturdier, better at keeping out the rabbits." She grinned at him. "Lambs too, I hope." Archie's face lit up, his hands weaving the small twigs as he told her about his preparations for the forthcoming lambs.
"We've got the milk powder ready, and Dan's been saving his clear beer bottles so I can see how much milk's left. That way, the new babies don't suck as much air," he said. "And I've scattered fresh hay all around their shelter so it's warm and snuggly at night."
"So all you need now is some poor mama sheep to cark it and you're set," April deadpanned, watching to see his response. She wasn't sure if he quite understood that for him to have an orphan lamb, something had to go awry in the process. Archie frowned.
"Well, kind of. But half the time they're orphans because the mum rejected the lamb, or she had triplets or twins, not because she kicked the bucket."
"Fingers crossed Marty and Barbara don't teach them their Houdini skills," she smiled. "That fence looks great. I'll get some more supplies." Even though the temperature hadn't risen above 12 degrees all week, and wasn't forecast to increase anytime soon, April soon warmed up as she hammered in the small stakes, handed the canes over to Archie, and weeded the burgeoning herb patch. She paused to appreciate the bees buzzing by the rosemary, oregano, chives, coriander, and sage. When Connor returned that afternoon with another wheelbarrow load of canes, straight off the vines, Archie and April had finished the ornate fences around the small veggie gardens and were planning their next move. "Smashing job," Connor told Archie, holding his hand out for a high five. When he got to April, he leaned in and kissed the top of her beanie-covered head.
"Ew, gross,"
Archie called, squeezing his eyes shut and sticking out his tongue. "A load of mulch, one last twig fence around the roses, and the B&B garden will be officially done," April said, standing up to stretch and discreetly steal a kiss from Connor while Archie was patting Mishka. With the three of them on deck, the rose garden was soon enclosed with its very own handmade knee-high fence. While the standard roses she'd transplanted from the Winklin's yard were still dormant, they stood tall and proud, ready to bloom their socks off. It wasn't hard to imagine the first flush of fragrant roses, with colourful ranunculus gathered at the base. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the sky turned an ominous grey as they shoveled mulch into the wheelbarrow and then onto the garden. "You'd better head home before it buckets down," April told Archie, thanking him for his help.
"What about the very first fire?"
He looked to the oak doors hopefully. "Tomorrow," April promised, holding out her little finger. He shook it, pleased that she'd offered him a pinky promise, and started for the laneway, his skipping turning to a jog as the rain started. "I'll open the shed door," Connor said, raising his voice above the wind that had arrived with the rain. April grinned, her hair lashing her face as she shook her head. I'm going to finish this mulch, and then the garden's officially done." There wasn't any particular reason the garden had to be completed that afternoon, given the first guests at Kookaburra Cottage weren't due for another fortnight, but April felt like a horse with the home gate in sight. They were so close to finishing. "You're mad, you know." Connor's navy jumper was speckled with raindrops, and the gentle patter gained momentum as April pushed the heavy barrow across the lawn, but he followed anyway. They shoveled the mulch in tandem until the rose garden was blanketed with a layer of wood chips, and they were both soaked to the bone. "Come on," Connor called, commandeering the wheelbarrow and making for the shed. She swiped at her wet fringe, which just made the rain run more freely into her eyes, and hugged her arms around her sodden midriff, beaming at the stables she'd transformed and the cottage gardens that were now, officially, complete. "It looks perfect," Connor said, stretching out his arm and snapping a selfie of them inside the cottage 2 weeks later, with the dusky spring afternoon light softening the room. April snuggled in against him, making him take a few more pictures before looking at her watch. The guests would arrive any moment. She'd been waiting for this day for years, and the last few months had flown past with Gordon finishing up a few weeks earlier and Connor sharing the icing-on-the-cake jobs, like fitting curtains, buying towels, and hunting down furnishings that befitted such a dreamy space. April moved the warm muffins into the centre of the kitchen bench and slipped a coaster under the vase of gum leaves on the French-polished side table. "Almost perfect," she said. She glanced around the room again before giving in to temptation and jogging up the iron staircase. April smoothed a hand over the mossy green quilt cover and fluffed the grey woolen throw rug at the foot of the bed one last time before switching on the lamp. "There," she whispered with a nod, appreciating how the tones of the bedding gave warmth to the crisp white paintwork. "Now it's ready." They walked out the front, trying not to look too eager, when an unfamiliar BMW rolled down the laneway and pulled up beside the guest parking sign. "Welcome, welcome," April said, handing across the keys and assessing the couple as they surveyed their accommodation. She tried to look at the building impartially, wondering if they could fathom the number of hours that had gone into every fitting and every fixture, from the hand-cut dowels in the window frames to the little garden markers Archie and Connor had surprised her with on the weekend, so guests could easily differentiate the flat-leaf parsley from the coriander. Connor slipped his arm around her shoulders, listening as she explained where the firewood was stored, and encouraged them to help themselves to the herb garden and call if they had any queries. "I never understood why Mum cried after Nell's first day of school. But it's a big thing, isn't it? Handing over those keys and hoping for the best." April brushed her eyes with a laugh, pleased that it was a momentous occasion for him, too. "At least we checked the bed doesn't creak," she said with a sniff and a giggle. Connor laughed. "You can never be too careful about quality control, and I'm sure the reviews will make special mention of that." And just like the stone entrance wall they'd almost finished, one carefully placed paddock rock at a time, the guest reviews through spring and into summer confirmed that their attention to detail and the personalised touches were worthwhile. A hidden gem. April's warm welcome made us feel right at home. Amy and Kev, SA. Perfect romantic getaway, freshly baked muffins and wine on arrival were a wonderful surprise. Phil and Craig, Vic. Glorious vineyard setting, little garden was buzzing with bees, blooms and butterflies. Michelle and Paul, QLD. An hour's drive from the beach in the heart of wine country. Winning. Katie and Tim, Vic. 17. Archie was at the door before Connor had even parked, wearing a Santa Claus t-shirt and matching hat.
"Check this out, Connor."
As he followed the boy inside, Connor saw the pom-pom at the end of his hat was lit up with flashing LED lights.
Ta-da!
An enormous Christmas tree stood in the centre of the Winklins' living room, the star on the top almost touching the 20-foot ceiling. Connor was so busy admiring the size of the tree, it took a few moments to twig that Archie's pom-pom was flashing in time with the tree's lights.
I can turn it off from here too,
said Archie, pulling out his phone and holding both sets of lights with the touch of a button. He then rushed to show him the train that circled the base of the tree, but Connor said gently, "We'd better get your lesson underway, Arch."
"It'll only take a minute. Wait until you see the caboose,"
said Archie, tugging him towards the tree. After 2 lazy locomotive laps, 3 minutes after the lesson was supposed to have started, Connor heard a voice down the corridor. Connor turned to see Rupert on his phone, watching them with a look that said, "I'm not paying you to play with tank engines." Connor finally lured Archie to the piano stool, but he noticed him faltering under his father's scrutiny as he ran up and down the scales. "Come and see me when your hour's up," Rupert said when he'd finished his call, frowning as Archie stumbled over a simple C chord. Archie perked up the moment his dad stopped watching, and the rest of the hour flew past. Connor declined Archie's offer to operate the train's controls, knowing the little boy would happily stretch out his visits half an hour each side. "Sorry, old chap, I've got piano lessons with the Morley girls after this. You go to school with them, right?"
"Ali and Grace are in my class."
Archie nodded, leading the way through the kitchen and down to Rupert's office.
"They're heaps nice. They're probably going to the fireworks at Beachport for New Year's Eve too. Dad can't make it, so I'll be the only kid in the district stuck at home."
Connor was sure that wasn't the case and told Archie so. "I do love a good fireworks display, though. I might have to check it out." Archie tugged on Connor's arm.
"Maybe I could go with you guys."
His whole body wriggled, just like the lambs when they saw him approaching with the milk bottles. Connor hedged, not wanting to make promises. "I'll talk to April, but if it's okay with your folks, I'm sure we could arrange it." Rupert looked up from his laptop as they walked into his office. "Arrange what?"
"The New Year's fireworks at Beachport, Dad."
"Can't think of anything worse. Hundreds of rowdy kids, dogs howling, all the teenagers traipsing down the street with their contraband alcohol." Rupert shuddered, tapping on the computer. "Let's get through Christmas first before we start worrying about New Year's." Archie took no notice, gazing up at Connor with shining eyes. If he had a tail, it'd be wagging, thought Connor. He looked at Rupert, who was still intent on his keyboard. "You wanted to see me?" Rupert stood, finally giving Connor his full attention. "Now, Jameson, the Vignerons Association has been thinking about arranging a Jazz in the Shiraz festival. We have an electric piano you can use. Obviously, it's still in the pipeline, but given our arrangement with lessons, it would make sense if you played at Winklen Wines." It was a statement rather than a question. But before Connor could politely explain that he didn't perform, and that even if he did, he'd play at Lacewing Estate, Archie interrupted.
"We could play together. That'd be so cool."
Rupert sighed, his frown returning. "Not if you hammer the keys and drift off into La La Land in the middle of practice, you won't be. This is a proper music event, not a primary school concert. We need music people will pay to hear." Connor could see Archie deflating with every word, and his heart ached as the boy ran out of the room. "I don't perform," Connor said stiffly, his eyes following Archie's retreat. "You don't perform? I checked your credentials before I hired you, and you've played all over London." "I might have once, but not anymore," Connor said, ignoring the ache in his leg. Rupert's eyes narrowed with a mix of sympathy and disappointment. "Burnout, I guess. Not everyone can handle the pressure at the top." Connor ignored the dig and picked up the framed photo on the desk. In the picture, Rupert clutched a newborn Archie awkwardly, like he didn't know what to do with the tiny, swaddled bundle in his arms. Evidently, he still hadn't nailed it, a decade on. "Archie's a good kid," Connor said quietly. "A really good kid who tries his hardest at so many things. The veggie patch at April's is overflowing with produce. The facts he comes up with about toads and frogs blow my mind, and you should see him playing the piano when he hits his stride." Connor set the photo frame down, preparing to tell Rupert Winklen to pull his bloody head in and appreciate his son, when he heard a shaky breath. He looked up to see Rupert covering his face with his hands. Oh God, is he crying? Connor gulped, averting his eyes. I know he's a good kid. Rupert's voice had an edge to it that Connor had never heard before, and he waited, unsure what to do or say as Rupert leaned on the desk, oblivious to the paperwork falling on the floor. He looks up to you, Connor said gently. Daniel, too. Rupert cleared his throat. I didn't know it would be this hard, the older man said, so softly that Connor had to strain to hear. I'm exhausted just watching him tear around the yard, chasing those ruddy lambs. And any time I suggest a night at the orchestra or film we might both like, he looks at me like I've grown another head. Do you know what I bought him for Christmas? Rupert reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gift bag. Connor could think of 100 things that the boisterous 10-year-old would love, but a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle wasn't among them. Had Rupert not noticed the boy could barely sit still for 5 minutes? Nell would probably like it, and he could see Fran Lacey perched in front of a card table with something similar, but Archie... He was more likely to enjoy the opera than an intricate jigsaw puzzle. My grandmother got something similar for me when I was that age, Rupert said. Took me all year to finish the darn thing, but it was rewarding from what I remember. Connor took a closer look. The landscape painting had a vegetable garden in the foreground and rolling hills in the background, with sheep breaking up the vast expanse of green. Connor didn't care for jigsaws, but he could imagine the green backdrop and the blue, mostly cloudless sky would test the patience of even the most accomplished puzzler. He'll like the theme, Connor offered, handing it back. He chanced a subtle look at his watch. He was officially late for the Morley twins now, but 5 more minutes wouldn't make much difference. He'll hate it, Rupert said. And the worst thing is, that was the best of a bad lot. Felicity's bought him something, of course, but she's always insisted I buy him a gift myself, too. He sighed, then threw a reproachful glance at Connor. I suppose I could ask April. She spends plenty of time with him. Or, I don't suppose you have... Rupert cleared his throat before finally blurting out the question, I don't suppose you have any suggestions. Connor was happy to share them, and when he left 5 minutes later, after a quick goodbye and Merry Christmas to Archie, he felt like he understood Rupert a little better. For all his criticisms and frowns, he really did love his son. He was just stuck negotiating the 50-year age gap. By Christmas Eve, April was well and truly ready for a holiday. Her long service leave felt like a distant memory, and with the influx of bed and breakfast guests, a pleasing spike in the number of cars pulling into Lacewing Estate, and preparing for their 3rd foodie function with Destination SA, Christmas had been the last thing on April's radar. Their first event in early December had gone off without a hitch. As promised, April had painted, landscaped, and cleaned Lacewing Estate until it sparkled, ready to host the first clients for their lavish long lunch. The function had been booked through the Destination SA website, and using the skills she'd learned through the online course, plus networks she'd created within the program, April worked with an event planner and caterers to pull off a stunning event. On the back of that success, they'd done it all again in mid-December for another corporate client who had also found them through Destination SA's promotions, a sumptuous seafood feast for an Adelaide brokerage firm this time, and April was hoping their 3rd hosting experience would be just as smooth sailing. You're a brave woman, accepting a booking for such a fancy Christmas lunch, Lauren said, zipping her suitcase shut. But at least by this time on Boxing Day, you'll get a sense of whether the extra money was worth the extra stress. April rifled through a bag of Christmas decorations. It's a bit late to change my mind now, she joked. Tomorrow's clients were wealthy graziers with a large family, and even larger land holdings across the southeast. Stephanie Scowler from Destination SA had called April personally to break the news that they wanted to book Lacewing Estate for their extended family celebration. And they were happy to pay a pretty penny for the use of the barrel room on Christmas Day. If we get a recommendation from just one of the 25 people sitting around the table tomorrow, drinking our wine, enjoying the atmosphere, then it'll be worth it.
Are you sure you have the energy to set up the Chrissy tree at this late stage?
Asked Lauren, wheeling the suitcase around the mess of plastic branches. It looks like a bomb has exploded in the living room. April stooped down to retrieve a slobbery Christmas tree branch from Mishka's basket. I almost didn't bother, but Archie was horrified at the thought. He was going to help me put it up, but the second he saw the cabbage moths circling his brassicas, he was a goner. Lauren grinned, leaning out the window to see Archie running between the veggie patches with a butterfly net, Mishka hot on his heels. The sunshine was hot, and April felt sweat beading on her forehead and back as she helped Lauren carry her luggage to the car. She wrapped her housemate in a big hug. You sure you'll need all this for a week in the Maldives? Lauren laughed. If my mum has anything to do with it, I'll spend most of my time in yoga classes. But it's Club Med, we're not paying, and it'll give Fergus a great preview of life with my crazy family, so at least there won't be any confusion about what he's getting himself into. I hope the Bickford family go easy on Fergus, April thought, waving her friend goodbye. Once the resident cabbage moth population was under control, the Christmas tree was complete, and Archie was on his way back home, April headed over to the winery. She'd just opened the tasting room door when Luke, the event planner, called. April, glad I caught you. I've got the chef and kitchen hands heading your way as we speak, so they can drop off the prepped ingredients for tomorrow, and I'll be there the minute my kids have unwrapped their presents. The venue's all set to go? April walked towards the barrel room, nodding. Sure is. The barrel room is spotless, and we've got the fairy lights and eucalyptus foliage in place, as promised. Now let's go over the wines you wanted one last time. She ran an eye down the chalkboard list she'd written earlier that day, checking off the bottles as Luke confirmed each course. Everything was ready, they were all set, and with a little luck, tomorrow's event would earn them plenty more word-of-mouth recommendations. All perfect, she confirmed, reminding him that she'd be there to let the staff in. Excellent, excellent. I look forward to seeing it myself. The last two events were a raging success. There's no reason this Christmas lunch won't run just as smoothly. And between you and me, I've got plenty more clients who are looking for something bespoke. We could make a right go of this, April. She signed off with a smile, hoping she didn't sound like too much of an eager beaver, and silently fist-pumped the air. Hosting these events would be the boost Lacewing Estate needed. April woke on Christmas morning to find Connor's arm draped over her shoulder, his legs entwined with hers, and his lips curved into a smile, even in his sleep. They celebrated the morning together, making the most of the empty house and lack of time constraints, drinking their coffee under the flowering gum. They left the presents under the Christmas tree at the winemaker's cottage and walked to the winery to check everything was set for their impending guests. The lunch wouldn't start for another 2 hours, but already there were bread rolls on the tables, festive table arrangements of grey-green eucalyptus and red kangaroo paws, and gleaming wine glasses, polished to a brilliant shine, at the ready. It looks amazing, April said, taking another photo on her new phone, the improved lens capturing the wine barrels, the fancy table arrangements, and, of course, the bottles of their finest wines, hand-selected for the exclusive guests. This Christmas is going to be hard to beat, she said, leaving the winery with a spring in her step and her arm looped through Connor's. They ambled through the vines, checking all was well at Kookaburra Cottage, before returning to April's for brunch. After finishing their croissants, April set up her laptop and drew her mum's present, which had arrived in the post the day before, onto her lap. Polly answered the call with a fruity-looking cocktail in one hand and a wrapped gift in the other. From what April could see in the background, it looked like another perfect day in the Tiwi Islands. "Merry Christmas, Mum," April said, smiling at the screen and lifting the wrapped box to the camera. "I'm so glad it arrived in time," Polly said. "You open yours first." Under the gift wrap, April found a colourful mass of fine string. A hammock. "If you're not heading my way any time soon, I thought you could do with one of your own. Unfortunately, I can't send you any palm trees, but it'll be perfect under those big gums." April smiled, admiring the careful weaving. Had it really been a year since she'd last seen her mum? There's also a voucher for art classes in the card, Polly said, moving her computer aside to sit her own present on the outdoor table. Seeing you like those cooking classes so much, I thought you could be like Claude Monet and do some plein air painting in the vineyards, she said. Thanks, Mum, April said. And while she was unsure when she'd find the time for painting classes alongside running the bed and breakfast, her horticulture job, and Lacewing estate, she was touched by the gesture. I can't believe you stayed in one spot for so long, said April. It must be good weather. And good company, said Polly with a wink, opening April's gift and peering into a small drawstring bag. Jewellery, my favourite. Without any hesitation, Polly replaced her earrings with the new ones. How do they look? April nodded, pleased. They're lovely. I got them in Beachport. There's a local lady there who makes them all by hand. They spoke for a while longer before Polly was interrupted by a visitor. I'd best dash, darling. The town parade is about to start. Hold on, Mum. I want you to say hello to someone. April beamed and moved the laptop so the camera caught Connor walking back with their drinks. Well, hello. This is a nice surprise, Polly said. Connor introduced himself, and she could have sworn her mum did a double take when she heard the accent. A British boy? Well, that's even more unexpected. As long as you don't drag her back to England with you, we'll get along just fine and dandy. Mum? April shook her head. Whether she was in Penwara or England probably wouldn't change the regularity of their catch-ups, but the comment reminded her of something else she needed to raise with Connor. She hadn't wanted to jinx things by pressing him on his plans beyond the 2-year visa, but they were getting serious now. Anyway, I really do have to dash, Polly said, waving from the laptop screen. Big love from me. Have a great day, and let's not leave it so long between catch-ups, okay, honey? I'm always here, Mum, April said. Love you too. Miss you. She's in the tropics, Connor asked, checking out the postage label on the box. For now, but I won't be surprised if she gets itchy feet soon. She's rarely in one place for long. Her next stop could be anywhere from Alaska to Borneo. Teaching and travelling are her passion. Not exactly a good fit for life on a family vineyard. He draped an arm around her shoulder, resting his chin on her head. Doesn't know what she's missing, he said. They set up the hammock outside, and after checking it would take both their weights, they chose a playlist on April's phone and spent the rest of the morning top and tailing in her new hammock, each with a book in hand. Why do I get the feeling you're not actually reading? Said Connor, twisting his head to look down the laneway. Hard to concentrate when this angle gives me a prime view of the cellar door, she said with a grin. Look at those flash cars pulling up. They both watched the well-dressed guests trail into the winery for their fully catered, no expenses spared Christmas lunch. A text from Fran came through at midday, checking what time they were coming for lunch. We could play hooky, pretend we're both sick, April suggested, trudging into her bedroom and changing into a green linen sundress. It'll be fine, said Connor. If Fergus can manage a whole week away with Lauren's family, I'm sure we can handle a few hours of being sociable. April laughed. Well, Dad's still sore about losing access to his beloved cellar door for the day, so I'm not sure even I can handle a few hours with him, she called out as she searched the bathroom cabinet for a bobby pin. April opened the mirrored cabinet above the sink, smiling at the sight of Connor's bamboo toothbrush. Just like the space she'd cleared for him in her home, her heart and her life were slowly filling with Connor-shaped moments and memories, and it was getting harder to ignore the ramifications of falling for him. How would she handle it if he returned to the UK when his visa expired? And what would he say if she asked him to stay? April closed the mirror, pinned back one side of her fringe with a bobby pin, and stared at her reflection. Until she knew the answer for sure, it was better not knowing whether she was enough to keep Connor in Australia. He appeared in the doorway, the sleeves of his blue shirt rolled up to his elbows, and gave an appreciative whistle. All set? April thought of her mum's advice. Live in the moment. She nodded and reached for his hand. All set? Lloyd led them through the kitchen to the formal dining room. The sliding glass doors opened out to the rows of grapevines, offering a view of the winery, the bed and breakfast, and the roof of April's little cottage. "Make yourselves comfortable," said Lloyd, gesturing to the cheese platter by the sofa and a decanter of red wine. Connor spent most of his days at Lacewing Estate, but he'd never been inside Lloyd and Fran's home before. He complimented the house as April poured them all a glass of wine. "Your home's made from the same bricks as the winery, right?" The rustic bricks were exposed along one wall of the lounge room, and he stepped closer to examine the photo frames hanging at regular intervals. "Yep, mud bricks, made with the dirt from our property, each one hand-pressed, just like our grapes. It'd be nice if all the buildings were paddock stone, like the winemaker's cottage and April's stables, but the bricks in this old joint have held up well," Lloyd said. While the bricks were impressive, it was the photos that had caught Connor's eye, documenting April through the ages. Sprawled on a rug with a dummy and wooden toys while workers grated fruit, as a toddler standing in the vineyards with a set of pruning shears, as a teenager driving the tractor between the vines, and one of her carrying a tray of wine with a too large Lacewing Estate apron tied around her scrawny waist, a mess of braces, pimples, and a high ponytail with an oversized scrunchie. He reached out, automatically straightening one of April in her university graduation gown when the frame fell off, hook and all, taking a section of wall with it. Connor just caught it in time. "I'm so sorry," he said, wincing at the small hole it had left in the brick. "Happens all the time," said April, getting a brush and pan. "The mud brick walls really need plastering over, but someone has trouble letting go of the past." They cleared up the mess while Fran and Lloyd tinkered with the meal in the kitchen. "Dad helped my pop make the winery bricks when he was a teenager," April explained. "He and Mum made these ones, and no matter how often we remind him that his hard work will still be visible on the outside if we plaster the internal walls, he won't budge on rendering or covering the insides." She lowered her voice. "It's on my to-do list for the cellar door too, but I'm not ready to fight that battle just yet." Lloyd returned to the room with several salads, noticing the frame in Connor's hand. "Like a little shadow she was," Lloyd said with a nod to the photo wall. "Always watching, learning, giving the workers advice on how to pack the wine boxes, and ripping into them when they picked too many bunches with rot." The image of April as a bossy tween made Connor chuckle. But when he looked up, his boss was a million miles away. "Had her heart set on taking over the winery at that age," Lloyd continued, his voice light. "But that's neither here nor there. Top of her class at uni," he said, holding a hand out for the frame. Connor passed it to him as Fran walked in with plates and cutlery. "Look at you getting all nostalgic," she said, placing the plates on the table, then rubbing her husband's arm. "I don't know about you lot, but I'm starving." Connor was about to sit down when his mobile buzzed. "Excuse me," he said, pulling the phone from his pocket and preparing to switch it to silent. "That's odd." "It's Barney from the golf club," he said, looking up to find everyone watching him. Why would Barney be calling him during Christmas lunch? Surely not to wish him season's greetings. "You didn't leave the oven on or anything, did you?" Fran asked. "The grass might be well watered, but the scrub around the golf course is tinder dry." Unease sat in Connor's chest as he looked back at the missed call on his phone. The oven was fine, but had Fergus turned the barbecue gas bottle off properly before he'd left for Club Med? "I might just call him quickly if you don't mind." All the media coverage of bushfires had Connor nervy about the idea of a fire. Thankfully, when the golf club president answered, he quickly quashed Connor's worries. "A fire? No, not at all. I think this is good news. You've got a surprise visitor." Barney laughed. "She's fresh off the bus from the airport and trying to track you down. He didn't mention you had a fiancé." 18. The Christmas lunch Fran had prepared looked tasty enough, but April could barely think of anything other than Phoebe's arrival as they sat down to eat. The mental image she'd built of Phoebe was of a pensive woman who was sporadically hit by bouts of debilitating depression. Even after she'd seen Phoebe briefly on Zoom at the Jamesons' annual jam session and then read about her on the hospital website, she hadn't pictured Connor's ex-fiancé as an international traveller with a penchant for surprises. Was Phoebe trying to rekindle things with Connor? Or did she just want the support only he could give? Whatever the case, April wasn't sure it had been the right thing to send him back to the golf course house alone. She felt uneasy and guilty that her mind hopped, skipped, and jumped to negative conclusions. Connor had given her no reason not to trust him, or his intentions, so why did she feel so anxious? She eyed the clock discreetly, wondering how early was too early to leave Christmas lunch. It was times like this she wished she were one of 6 children, with brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, and a swag of partners or in-laws to add extra numbers and conversations to the event. Her father hacked a slice of ham off the bone, slathering it with cranberry sauce and wedging it between 2 slices of bread. If the non-stop grazing and winery-angled window gazing was any indication, he was definitely comfort-eating his way through the day. Mishka looked up hopefully from his feet and was rewarded with a generous sliver of ham rind. "Remember the time we had my cousins Ted and Saoirse across from Ireland for Christmas? Those were the days," Fran said. "That was one of the best Christmases," Lloyd agreed. "They couldn't believe how beautiful our winery was, and how perfect a venue it is for a Christmas lunch." "The best Christmas? Dad, you nearly sent one of them into anaphylactic shock," April said, surprised that her father had forgotten. "We would have had to call an ambulance if she hadn't had an EpiPen in her luggage." April also remembered the moment when one of Fran's brothers, who had travelled across from Darwin, had nearly come to blows with a cousin in a heated conversation about the suggested rescheduling of Australia Day. "From my recollections," she added with a frown, "we all breathed a sigh of relief when everyone went home." "But the venue, April, the venue. Sunshine pouring in through the winery's clerestory windows, barrels in the background, white tablecloths," Lloyd said wistfully. "I'm really not thrilled about hiring the place out on Christmas Day." "Do you think we should go across and check on the guests?" Fran craned her neck, looking across the vines. April shook her head. "Luke makes a living out of event planning. He doesn't want or need us hovering. They've got everything they need there. With a bit of luck, the guests will be drinking bucket loads of wine and asking to come back for New Year's, Valentine's and Easter." "I thought you already had a New Year's booking." April nodded. They were hosting a fancy lunch at Lacewing on New Year's Day, and visitors at Kookaburra Cottage too. It felt like an eon since that very first B&B booking had come through, and although plenty of couples had stayed at the cottage before them, April always smiled when she thought of Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, their upcoming New Year's Eve guests. Her smile wasn't as quick today, though. April glanced at her watch. "Time for dessert?" asked Fran, desperate to lighten the mood. April pushed her portion of Christmas trifle around her plate, then said her goodbyes and clipped the lead on Mishka. The sun still had some bite in it as she walked from the main house to her little cottage with a gift hamper tucked under her arm, thinking of the glorious morning she and Connor had spent in the hammock, relaxed in the way only sated lovers can be. Once she got inside, April cranked open the windows and was just deliberating on whether to retire to the new hammock with a drink or call Connor when a text message arrived from Geraldine. "Merry Christmas, cooking students. Just a reminder that you're more than welcome to call in for drinks and nibbles this afternoon. I may have gotten a little carried away. XG." April opened Geraldine's photo, swooning at the spread their cooking teacher had made. Cream puffs, petit fours, macaroons, mini cheesecakes. It was what she imagined high tea at the Ritz would look like. Another photo came through, this time of Geraldine with a Santa hat on and a glass of champagne raised in the air, as if she were doing a cheers through the phone. Sensing a hint of loneliness behind Geraldine's festive red lipstick and smile, April grabbed 2 of the small gift bags by the mini tree in the living room. Just because Connor was indisposed didn't mean she had to sit around moping and stewing. All the way home from Lacewing Estate, Connor racked his brain for the conversation in which he'd mentioned to Phoebe that he was living at the Pemwara Golf Club, but he was none the wiser by the time he arrived at the rental. Mum and Dad must have told her. Phoebe stepped out from under the veranda in a floppy sun hat and oversized glasses, an enormous grin on her face. Even in his surprised state, Connor couldn't deny she was looking as fit as ever, with her long hair falling over her shoulders in gentle waves and a denim dress that set off her pale complexion. He gulped, hating that he'd even registered such a thing, and switched off the ignition. Phoebe wrapped her arms around him the moment he stepped out of the Camry. "Surprise!" She squeezed his shoulders, and his manners eventually kicked in. Connor patted her back awkwardly, the questions tumbling out. "What are you doing here? How did you get to Pemwara? And how did you get Barney here on Christmas Day?" Phoebe laughed, grabbing his hand and pulling him to the door. So many questions and so many answers. But first, do you mind if I steal a shower? I've been wearing these clothes for days and I feel like death warmed up." Connor nodded and unlocked the house, relieved the place was tidy and there wasn't a Scotsman and April's best friend there to pepper him with questions he couldn't yet answer. At a loss for what to do while Phoebe showered, Connor changed the sheets on his bed. Most of his things were in the back of his car or at April's, but making room in the wardrobe and changing the linen was better than sitting with a knot in his stomach, pondering Phoebe's arrival. "Miracle of miracles, I'm semi-human again." Phoebe grinned, emerging from the shower with pink cheeks, wet hair, and a towel wrapped almost twice around her body. "Though it was quite difficult rinsing out shampoo in that shower. I've had better water pressure strolling past the car wash," she said, combing the knots from her flaxen hair. "It's the rainwater," he said quietly. "Took me ages to get used to the low pressure in the shower too, but the whole house is on rainwater, so water conversation's a big thing here." He averted his eyes, trying not to notice the new inkwork on her arms. "Was I supposed to know you were coming?" he asked, busying himself in the kitchen. There were milk and eggs in the fridge, a selection of limp veggies, and a quick check of the freezer confirmed there was also bread and a range of frosted takeaway containers. It wouldn't be a festive feast, but she wouldn't starve. "No," she said, grabbing her suitcase as he led her down the hallway to his bedroom before making a beeline for the kitchen. "I wasn't sure Pippin could keep a secret, but she obviously did well," Phoebe called from his bedroom. "Your voice when Barney called was priceless." Her laugh tinkled down the hall. "He had you on speakerphone. I may have fibbed about the fiancé bit, but I felt a bit bad for calling him out on Christmas Day. His number was on the clubhouse doors, mind you." Phoebe breezed back into the lounge, wearing a light purple dress. "You don't mind, do you?" "If I'd known you were coming, I'd have suggested a hotel." He cleared his throat, trying to clear his thoughts in the process. "I was just sitting down to Christmas lunch with my girlfriend. Phoebe, you can't just spring something like this on me." "You would have tried talking me out of it," she said, lifting his shoulder. "I needed a change of scenery and some sunshine." Connor waved a hand towards his bedroom. "You can stay in my room for a few nights. I'm still paying rent, so it may as well not go to waste. But I haven't been sitting around waiting for you, Phoebe. Honest to God, I've got a girlfriend and a good job, and I'll be staying at April's cottage, not here." Nodding, Phoebe held up a hand. I know. I'm not here to upset the apple cart. I wanted to see for myself, that's all. And if you're going to fly all the way across the world, then you may as well make a holiday of it, right?" Connor poured himself a glass of cold water from the fridge and sagged against the bench. April's folks had been understanding enough, and April hadn't hesitated to offer up her spare bed, but he hated the situation Phoebe had put him in. He couldn't just turn her away when she knew no one. Connor tapped out a quick message to April. "I'll get Phoebe settled, then I'll come meet you. Are you still at your dad's?" April's reply came back almost immediately, as if she'd been sitting by her phone. "On my way to Geraldine's. Meet you there." Connor smiled wearily, wanting to rewind back to their carefree morning. He replied with a thumbs-up text. Phoebe joined him at the sink, filling a glass with water. "I'll be careful, Connor," she promised, and he couldn't tell if she was talking about the rainwater or the fragility of his new relationship with April. "And I brought you a present," she added, pulling a gift from her handbag. "Go on, take it," she said. Consider it payment for the precious rainwater and fresh bed linen. Connor relented, unsure what she could have for him that warranted hand delivering all the way from the UK. He wasn't prepared for the framed black and white close-up of two tiny hands, cupped in his own hands. Saviour. His eyes burned as he remembered the momentous weight of such a tiny, cold hand in his. Phoebe had taken a series of these photos, and he'd long since packed the tiny leather-bound photo album in the storage boxes in his parents' attic, the contents too raw and upsetting to have close by. He had long fingers like you, she whispered. Do you remember? Of course I remember. She stepped in closer, resting her hand over his. I wish I'd come to Australia with you, Connor. I shouldn't have let you leave. Connor slid his hand out from under hers and ran it through his hair. He wanted to hear those words 18 months ago. Not now. He turned abruptly, collecting his phone and a light jumper, the small gift he'd bought for Geraldine, and a bottle of wine. He hesitated at the door, then ducked back and grabbed a second bottle. I'm not even sure what to say to that, he said. There's food in the pantry and freezer. I'm going out. Where are you going? Her thin voice cracked on the final word, and it took all of Connor's strength to keep walking out the door. April stood up when Connor entered, the haunted look on his face reminding her of their conversation at Beachport when he'd spoken about the accident. And was it her imagination, or was his limp slightly more pronounced? Here he is, cried Brian, clapping Connor on his shoulder and draping a paper crown over his blonde hair. Geraldine pulled him into a hug, clearly oblivious about the reason Connor was late. I didn't think it was my place to say anything, April said in a hushed voice, handing him a glass of wine, while Geraldine pulled another platter from the fridge. How's Phoebe? He shrugged. Complicated. Let's talk about it later, yeah? She threaded her fingers through his, pleased to have him close again. Brian rifled through Geraldine's record collection and selected a Cat Stevens album. They set up a feast beneath a pergola, toasting the occasion and listening to Brian's latest update on his veggie patch. I've spent half the week on the end of a grubber, Brian said, finishing off another fruit mince pie. A grubber? April and Connor both grinned, trying to picture whether it was a machine or tool. Brian rolled his eyes, looking to Geraldine for backup, but she was none the wiser. One of those hoe thingamabobs, flat blade on one side, point on the other? I haven't got the foggiest, Geraldine said. It must be a Victorian term. Brian eased himself out of his wicker chair and wandered across to the small garden shed at the bottom of the yard, rummaging around like he'd been there before. He emerged with a garden tool and gave them a quick demonstration on how to easily remove a section of capeweed. Now I've got a hole in the lawn thanks to your grubby grubber, scolded Geraldine with a chuckle. You'd best fill that in. At least it saves your back when you're weeding, Brian called, walking the tool back to the shed. Saves your back, ruins your ankles. Who's this coming across the lawn? Geraldine said, shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun and getting to her feet. Maddie must have changed her mind. April looked at the pair of matching gift bags she'd brought, glad she'd gambled on Maddie being there too. But when their cooking instructor returned, it was not with their tween cooking enthusiast. Instead, a tall, angular woman with soft blonde hair and wrists as fragile as the thin straps on her sundress tailed Geraldine. Phoebe! Connor leaped to his feet. Phoebe? April took a sharp breath and glanced at Connor, who looked as shocked as she felt. She willed herself to stay calm and stood, wincing as she slopped red wine from her glass onto her dress. Hi, Phoebe. Welcome to South Australia. As April walked across to greet Phoebe, Mishka bounded out of the garden shed, the tinsel on her collar flapping. Catching the dip in the grass where the capeweed had been just minutes earlier, the golden retriever cut behind her bare legs, and Phoebe pitched sideways. Oof! Mishka barked. I'm so sorry. Here, April said, her face flushed red as she reached for Phoebe's hand to help her up. If she'd been sturdier looking, April mightn't have been so worried. But there was something fragile about the British girl. It felt like sheer luck that she had escaped broken bones, scrapes, or at the very least, a whopping bruise. "Brian and his bloody grubber," said Geraldine, trying to assist April. Mishka pranced between them, her canine concern hampering Phoebe's attempts to get off the ground. Connor, who'd been frozen to the spot, suddenly kicked into action and grabbed the dog by the collar. Receiving a grateful but still mortified look from April, he hauled the licking, tail-wagging bundle of wriggly golden fur away. "You right?" He gave the two women a harried look, then shook his head at Mishka, her chocolate eyes gazing at him with adoration. "Phoebe, what brings you here?" Before she had a chance to answer, Brian, who'd marched over from the garden shed with a bag of potting mix in his hand, cut in. "Murphy's Law, isn't it? My apologies." Phoebe brushed the grass off her lilac dress, looking slightly flustered from the kerfuffle. She forced a bright smile at Brian. "No harm done?" Then moved towards Connor. "I think I might go," she said. "Please, don't go, honestly. I feel terrible," said April. Stay, added Geraldine. "There's way too much food. Please, I insist." April looked at Connor, who had remained quiet. "I meant I might go to a hotel. I shouldn't have imposed," Phoebe said, with a sigh that sounded like it came from the soles of her feet. "I've packed my suitcase. I just need a lift into town." April watched Connor's eyes scanning Phoebe's drawn face, while Geraldine and Brian hurried off in search of another bottle of wine. It was hard to watch the silent conversation going on between the two Brits, and April felt a chill down her spine as she deliberated on what to do. Offer Phoebe a lift into town or a spare bed? Implore her to stay so she had an opportunity to get to know the woman who'd once been a big part of Connor's life? Or stay the hell out of it? She opted for the latter, following Geraldine and Brian inside the farmhouse kitchen. "Thank goodness she's not American, or she'd probably sue us both," Geraldine said to Brian, poking his arm. "I've never had a student injured on the premises." April took a stool at the island bench, trying to avoid blatantly staring at the conversation going on outside. Connor looked resigned, worlds away from the man who'd made her coffee in bed that morning, his cheeks turning a familiar Shiraz colour. She could see Phoebe's hands gesturing as she spoke. Connor opened the glass doors and gave them all a weary smile. "Sorry about that," he said. "I don't know about Phoebe, but I'll definitely take you up on that glass of wine, Brian." Phoebe followed him in. "Yes, me too, thanks," she said, crossing her arms. "Only if you're sure you don't mind a gatecrasher." Geraldine nodded eagerly. "Absolutely," she said, "as long as you promise to eat some of the food and forgive us for the uneven lawn." "And the boisterous dog," added April. Phoebe nodded, and soon they were all outside again with food and more wine. "I've heard great things about Lacewing Estate, April. You've got beautiful photos on your website, and the reviews are amazing," Phoebe said, beaming at her with those white, straight teeth. April mustered up a smile in response. "Thanks," she said. "It's a pretty special spot." "Special's an understatement," said Brian. "You should see how much effort's gone into the B&B renovation. We had a grand tour last month. You'd never know it was a storage shed this time last year." "And I have it on good authority the homemade muffins are a hit," added Geraldine, her voice ringing with pride. "They both took my cooking classes, you see. Improved in leaps and bounds with every weekend." "I'd love to see both," said Phoebe, "the winery and the cooking." She soon had them laughing with a story about Connor's gritty attempt at scrambled eggs and his initial success at camouflaging bits of shell with a generous helping of cracked black pepper, chili flakes, and sea salt. Our tongues were burning after a few mouthfuls, and little Nellie was drinking milk straight from the carton. Cooking isn't my thing, so I'm glad he finally sought skilled instruction from someone who knows what they're doing. I bet your guests love the homemade touch, April. And if you don't mind giving tours, I'd love to check it out. "I'm sure we can arrange that," said April. "Are you staying long?" "Please say no. Please say no." Phoebe wiggled her hand left and then right.
My ticket's open-ended, so I'm playing it by ear.
April nodded, sipping at her wine, ignoring the simmering unease in her stomach. Maybe it's a good thing, she told herself. Perhaps she and Phoebe would become friends. From the sounds of it, Connor and Phoebe needed to have a long, hard talk, and the sooner it happened, the better. It wasn't even 8 p.m., but Connor felt bone-tired and ready for bed. He felt April's fingers slide through his, and he squeezed them back, grateful she'd taken their unexpected visitor in her stride. Phoebe might have had a misguided notion about rekindling things, but that didn't mean he had to play along. Connor leaned closer, taking strength from April's familiar scent of wild plums and cherries, while Phoebe's words echoed in his ears.
I want to try again, Connor. I won't go back to England until you can tell me without a hint of doubt that you can't see a future for us.
It wasn't a conversation he'd wanted to have on Christmas Day in Geraldine's garden, with April and his new friends not far away, but he'd been quick to clarify things were well and truly over. He just hoped she'd accept it. Are you ready to call it a night? He asked April softly. She nodded, swatting away a mosquito. I am if you are, she said. Shall we walk Phoebe back? He looked inside. Phoebe had insisted on helping Geraldine and Brian with the dishes, and he'd been happy for the breathing space. She found her way here. She should be able to find her way back. April chuckled and rubbed his arm. She could be mobbed by a kangaroo or slip on a stray golf ball. Ishka's already given her a rough welcome. I think we can spare 10 minutes to walk her home. April pulled him to his feet. They headed into the kitchen, where Phoebe was discussing her role at the hospital.
There's never a dull moment in accident and emergency. I pretty much blink and the shift's over. Night shift's always hard, but helping families through the tough times makes it worthwhile.
Connor watched Phoebe hold court with a tea towel in one hand and cutlery in the other. Not to mention, Phoebe grinned at him, all the chocolates, he finished. She was a darn good nurse, and there'd always been a steady stream of cards and sweets in their flat from appreciative patients. But it had made it harder for her when they'd lost Xavier, because she'd known the technical terms the doctors used and understood the gravity of the situation before he did. She was familiar with the carefully chosen words her colleagues favoured, and was reminded of that painful loss every time she walked past the maternity ward. Anyone keen for a round of celebrity heads or Pictionary? Geraldine asked, drying her hands. Connor didn't miss Phoebe's knowing look. He'd never been a fan of board games, especially interactive ones. As he stood there, surrounded by his new Australian friends, he realised she was the only one who knew that about him. I think we'll be off, but thanks very much for the supper, he said warmly. After all those glorious desserts, I could probably roll myself down the fairway, April said, before turning to Phoebe. We'll walk you back. Phoebe nodded, and Geraldine and Brian fussed over gathering up their belongings. For someone who hadn't arranged anything official for the day, Geraldine had gone to quite a bit of effort, Connor thought, accepting one of the gift bags she was passing out. Connor reached for April's free hand. Being face-to-face with Phoebe for the first time in 18 months was easier with April by his side. When Phoebe kneeled down to adjust her sandal, he noticed a long, fine silver chain dangling around her neck. She tucked it back into her dress as she straightened, but not before he saw what was on it. The engagement ring. Connor exhaled slowly, hoping nobody else had seen it. Whatever Phoebe was playing at, April didn't deserve to get caught in the crossfire. While Phoebe and April made small talk across the fairways, Connor felt like the short walk was painfully longer than usual, and he was relieved when the little rental came into view. Connor unlocked the door, then handed Phoebe his keys. The Camry and the house are yours for the week if you need, he said. My housemate is back on New Year's Day, so you'll probably want to aim to head to Adelaide or Melbourne by then. April called goodbye, and he held her hand as they retraced their steps to Geraldine's, collected the Hilux ute, and headed for Lacewing Estate. Connor looked out the window, silent as they drove through Penwara. He told Phoebe they were over, and he'd meant every word of it. There was no chance Phoebe could mistake the happiness between him and April when she saw it with her own eyes. But if she hadn't already, if it took her a week, it would be a week well spent. "19. Normally, the private gardens April managed felt like an oasis, with topiary hedges that she kept trimmed to perfection, a cascading jasmine arbor that brides posed beneath for their springtime weddings, and a stunning southern corner where clouds of blousy hydrangeas lapped in the shade. But today, smack bang in the middle of the limbo week between Christmas and New Year, her mind was in turmoil. She tossed a discarded shawl, a toddler's sun hat, and an empty confetti box into her wheelbarrow with a sigh, checked the watering system was running smoothly, and headed back to the shed. Lost property at the gardens was rarely claimed, unlike the chargers, pillows, and jewellery guests left behind at Kookaburra Cottage. April had already been to the Penwara post office several times to send items back to their forgetful owners. If only it were that easy to dispatch of unwanted ex-fiancés. The churlish thought was quickly replaced by a stab of guilt as April carried a bucket of flowers and her lunchbox to her ute. She pondered the problem as she drove home. It would be so much easier to dislike Phoebe if she were nasty or possessive or blatantly out to steal Connor from under her nose, but so far there was nothing April could fault her on, apart from her very existence and her presence in Penwara. April had stripped the sheets and cleaned the B&B after yesterday's visitors checked out, so all that was left to do before the next couple arrived was arrange the hydrangeas in a vase, turn on the small split-system air conditioner so it was cool for the newcomers, and mix up a batch of muffins. There was no sign of Connor, but Mishka was pleased to see her when she arrived back at the cottage. Happy to eat the snail-damaged strawberries, the dog stuck close to her as she collected a bowl of berries for the muffins, and when they got inside and she turned on her own air conditioner, the retriever flopped down in her basket. "Sure is warm, hey, Mish," said April, noticing she'd had a touch too much sun herself today. Although she itched to change out of her work clothes and into a summer dress, she wanted to get the muffins in the oven first. A memory of Geraldine's calm, wise voice was in her ear as she measured the flour, added the sugar, and folded the berries through the mixture. After so many years of avoiding cooking, despising the burnt, inedible evidence of her incompetency, it was still surreal to know that if she followed the steps to a T, double-checked the measurements, and watched them carefully as they cooked, she could produce something beautiful. And not just once, but again and again. Cooking, once you knew how, really was its own brand of alchemy, she thought. But the satisfaction of turning out the muffins and the momentary calm as she taste-tested one evaporated when a knock and a cheery hello sounded from outside. "Oh, Phoebe," April said, answering the door with an oven mitt in her hands. She scooped her fringe away from her eyes. She probably looked like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. Though anyone would, she thought sadly, standing beside this willowy blonde in the patterned dress. "I was just heading to the cottage to drop muffins off for today's guests." "Do you mind if I come? I've been dying for a look," said Phoebe, with such enthusiasm that April had no option but to nod. "It's absolutely adorable." Phoebe's eyes widened as she stood in the B&B kitchen with the wooden chopping boards, tea chest, and greenery against the subway tiles, her fingers trailing along the polished concrete benchtop.
End of CD 7. CD 8.
April sat the muffins in the centre of the bench, folded the tea towel until it was just right, and picked an errant crumb off the gleaming counter. The room was cool and bright, and she knew that the warm baking would add a sweet scent for her guest's arrival. "You're welcome to have a quick squiz, but Mr. and Mrs. Barber will be here shortly, and I can't make them looking like this," April said apologetically, gesturing to the grass stains on her knees and her sweat-stained gardening shirt. Phoebe looked at the staircase and then back at April. "Do we have time?" "Go on, it won't take a minute." April nodded to the mezzanine. Phoebe was effusive with her praise, noticing not just the soft furnishings and fittings, but the way the layout made the most of the small building. "I especially love the way you used the old horseshoes for towel hooks, and the leather straps holding them on the bathroom shelves," Phoebe said as they left the stables. "Are they from the saddlery?" April nodded, begrudgingly impressed. "You're the first person to mention that. They used to be part of the ploughing harness from my great-grandfather's era. He used horses to till the soil and cart the grapes. My dad remembers his fathers using the Clydesdales occasionally, too." They arrived at the winemaker's cottage to find Archie heading in their direction. "Hey, Arch," April called. "This is Phoebe. She knows Connor."
Awesome! You're the lady who gave Con's sister the tortoises, aren't you?
Phoebe laughed, surprised. "I had no idea they'd be such a talking point. But yes, lovely to meet you." April left them chatting while she ducked into the shower, and when she got back from welcoming the Barbers and giving them the spiel about the district, the stables, and the checkout time, Archie and Phoebe were crouched over his veggie patch. "Shh," said Archie, turning to her with a grin on his face and a finger over his lips.
"I'm trying to find Tiddalik."
April wasn't sure how much Phoebe really liked amphibians, but she watched Archie carefully scoop up the small creature. He showed it off as if it were his pride and joy.
"He's heavier than he looks too, and he's nice and cold, not slimy at all,"
Archie said. And before Phoebe could demur, she was holding the brown spotted frog and not even squealing when it piddled on her. Archie collapsed in a fit of laughter. Phoebe looked mortified. "I think Tiddalick's ready to return to the patch now," April said, nestling the creature in a shady spot between the rhubarb stalks.
"Now there's a good story for Nell and Pippin,"
Phoebe said, rinsing her hands under the tap April had indicated. "They'll love that." And as they went inside for a proper wash-up and cool drink, April could just imagine Phoebe sitting around the Jamesons' dining table upon her return, sharing stories with Connor's family. The thought was as vivid as it was infuriating. Instead of the cruisy post-Christmas week he'd planned with April, Connor found his head in a whirl, and soon there were only a few days left of the year. There was plenty to be done at Lacewing Estate, thankfully, and he welcomed the distraction. With a coffee and piece of toast in each hand, he sat at the dining table and called Heidi as he ate. "I bet you're missing this place," she said from her living room, wiping her mouth with a serviette. "I've just nipped out for a late-night chip butty and it's snowing. Slush up to my ankles and icy enough to make you consider every step. Tell me it's tanking down there, or at least it's so sweltering hot that you can't go outside." Connor laughed, peering out the window. "Blue skies, heading for about 28 degrees and sunny. I can't complain," he said, turning his computer so she could see for herself. April had set the sprinklers before she'd left for Mount Gambier, keen to get the bulk of her horticulture tasks done before the heat set in. "And if it's anything like last night, I think we'll head to the beach when April gets back. I do miss home, but it's hard to beat sundowners on the sand, cooling our feet in the ocean with a beer in hand," he said. "How's Phoebe liking it?" Connor's smile faltered. Heidi knew about the conversation he and Phoebe had on Christmas Day. "I'm not terribly sure how she's liking it. I've been trying to steer clear of her, to be honest. I've given her my car and my house for a week, and then, after I've driven her to the bus stop or airport, I'll be able to relax again." Heidi was silent for a moment, adding more HP sauce to her chip sandwich. "So you're just avoiding her?" "Sure am. I didn't ask Phoebe here." "Connor," Heidi said sharply, "you were perfect together, the golden couple. And everyone around here loves her. You know that. She's travelled a long way to see you, to talk to you." "Who goes around doing that type of stuff, though? I've made it clear I'm with April now," Connor said, smearing a drop of coffee over the tabletop. "And what does she think about it all?" Connor raised both eyebrows. "You think I'd tell April what Phoebe said? Are you bonkers? Phoebe's here another few days, then she leaves and we go back to normal. I would have thought you'd at least hear Phoebe out, Con." Connor shook his head and changed the subject. But as he left the cottage later that morning, Heidi's words played on his mind. Was he just kicking the can further down the road by avoiding the issue rather than tackling it head-on? Connor found Lloyd in a chirpy mood in the barrel room. "Now tell me what you think of this one," Lloyd said, pulling the wine thief from a barrel of Cab Sauv. "Not bad," said Connor, swirling it in his mouth and listing the flavours as they came to him. He could see why Lloyd was pleased with the blend. "And you'll be right with us going away for New Year's Eve? I've barely seen April this week, and I know she's just trying to put her stamp on the place, but I don't want to come home to any more surprises." He tapped his chest. "This old ticker can't handle too many more renovations, and I've got a lot of living left to do." "No more surprises," Connor promised wryly. Truth be told, he hadn't seen much of April this week either, but it didn't seem like something to mention to her father. The conversation turned to the bed and breakfast, which Lloyd was pleased with, and then the food tourism, which he was ambivalent about. "I'm still not in love with the idea, but the first 3 events we hosted went off without a hitch," conceded Lloyd, moving to the next barrel and taking a sample. "And April's worked her guts out to make it happen, so I can't get too stroppy about the whole thing." "And there's been quite the increase in traffic," Connor added with a grin as tyres crunched on the gravel outside. "Nothing like some new signs, a snazzy stone fence and some landscaping to make an impact." "Yeah, I'll give you that," said Lloyd, a good-natured smile on his face. His mood was catching, but when Connor peered into the tasting room, rather than the tourist he'd expected, he found Phoebe chatting to Fran.
"I drove to Narra Court today and saw the caves," she was telling Fran. "Imagine bumping into a 2-metre-tall tree kangaroo on your morning walk, or a huge wombat." She spotted Connor and smiled. "Have you seen the megafauna displays there, Con?"
"I haven't had a chance yet," he said, wiping his hands on his shorts. "Everything okay at the house?"
"Yeah, it's fine. Just a little tired of my own company, really. Oh, and there's some sheep on the loose near the B&B. Are they supposed to be there?"
Archie's latest batch of lambs must have found the escape route. Connor met Fran's eye, knowing he'd better return them to the paddock before Lloyd discovered them. He pulled on a hat and beckoned to Phoebe. "We'll herd 'em out, Fran. Back in a bit." They found the first lamb nibbling on the rosemary near the stables. "Go back a bit, Phoebe, slowly now. Wait. Back. Back. Ah!" The lambs bolted around Phoebe, and she squealed as they whipped past her. The expression on her face made him burst out laughing.
"I'm rubbish at this,"
she said, joining in with his laughter. Connor tried a few more times, but finally they gave up. "We'll have to get Archie. He's got pellets that'll turn anyone into the Pied Piper." With a touch of sun on her face and enthusiasm in her voice as they walked across to the Winklands, Phoebe reminded him of the woman he'd met all those years ago.
"I've been thinking, maybe I should stay."
Connor coughed. "In Australia?"
"In Pemwara," she said quickly. "It's good for me here. People are sweet. Geraldine said I was welcome any time. April's nice. Even the guy at the bakery offered me a job, which could come in handy while I'm waiting for something to come up at the hospital."
Pausing at the gate, Connor shook his head. "I'm not sure Pemwara's the best idea. Feel free to try a luck in a different country town, or over the border in Victoria. But not Pemwara."
"It was just an idea," she said, putting her hand on his. "Have you thought any more about what I said? We were good together, Connor. We could still be good together. I really shouldn't have let you leave without me."
Connor jammed his hands into his pockets, uncertainty swirling through his thoughts. Wasn't that exactly what he'd wanted to hear 18 months ago? Hadn't he lain awake at night in the months before he flew to Australia, trying to think of ways to convince her he was wrong for breaking off their engagement, that they belonged together? He stepped away, latching the gate behind them. "A lot's happened in the last 18 months, Phoebe. I know I was in two minds after our breakup, but I've settled in here. I've moved on." Connor tried to interpret the expression on her fine features. There was a vulnerability that he'd once been able to read like it was his own. But there was hope, too. And right there, shrouded in a wary smile, was the admission that she'd never stopped loving him. "It's too late, Phoebe," he said, breaking it to her as gently as he could.
"I said it on Christmas Day, and I'll say it again.
I'll never stop loving you, Con, even if it's not reciprocated. He took a stealing breath and continued to the Winklands' yard. He found Archie out the front, kicking a football to himself. Connor explained the lamb situation.
They're as naughty as last year's flock,
Archie said, his freckled nose wrinkling. He dropped the football immediately and spent the entire walk back to Lacewing explaining who the troublemakers had been amongst the various lambs he'd reared. With Archie at the helm, they quickly got the lambs back into the paddock. The young boy didn't seem to notice Phoebe's pained expression and continued carrying the conversation, moving on to the New Year's Eve fireworks and carnival food. Connor closed his eyes a bit, remembering his and Phoebe's last New Year's Eve together, how they'd rugged up against the polar blast, taking turns to warm Pippin and Nell's hands between their own, and huddling together like penguins for the fireworks. There was a fraction of truth in what Heidi had said. Their loved-up couple bubble had been all-consuming. And what about the promise he'd made after losing Xavier? The promise that he'd never leave Phoebe. The promise that they'd forge a future together. Connor kicked at the dusty limestone and exhaled slowly, trying to wash away the guilt and the sinking suspicion that after his role in the accident, he didn't deserve the love of one woman, let alone two. April cruised through the vineyard later that week, her attention on the burgeoning clusters of fruits on the vine. There must be a god shining down on them from somewhere above, because not only were the vines laden with fruit, but the people who had spent Christmas in the barrel room had rebooked and spread the word among their wealthy farming networks, and now Lacewing Estate was taking bookings for Easter. They were also hosting a fancy lunch on New Year's Day, with one of the Destination SA teams staying the night afterwards. The only fly in the ointment was blonde, British, and agonizingly nice. April plucked a bunch of grapes off the vine, holding the tight green cluster up to the sun and twisting it in the light. They were still a few months away from ripening, but it always felt a little like a miracle in the making to appreciate the berries at each stage. Do they taste different to table grapes? April spun around at the familiar accent, a polite smile at the ready. Phoebe's black polo shirt fitted her like a glove, and her fair hair was swept back beneath a baseball cap. These ones have still got a few months left on the vine, so they're as hard as rocks right now, April said. But when they're ripe, they've got a much bigger flavour profile than the grapes you buy at the supermarket. She brushed aside the leafy canopy so Phoebe could see the immature bunches. They're teeny tiny. We don't want big grapes. The smaller the berry, the more intense the flavour, April said. She put the pruners back into her pocket, quite sure Phoebe wasn't here for a TED Talk on grapes. She noticed the white Camry in the winery car park. You out exploring? Too nice to sit inside. Phoebe played with the peak of her cap, moulding it between her palms. Connor said you might need a hand. April studied the tall blonde, wondering what else Connor had mentioned. Had he told Phoebe that he was falling for April? Or was that just something he'd said in the heat of the moment? He wasn't sure what to make of his distance these last few days, but an element of self-preservation had prompted her to keep her head down and channel the uncertainty into work. I'm just about to prep for the next guests, she said, whistling for Mishka, who had spent the last half hour stalking butterflies. Sure, I can help with that, she said, beaming at April and following her to the stables. Phoebe startled when raucous laughter came from the gum tree. What on earth was that? Up there, said April, pointing to the hollow where the family of kookaburras nested. Hence the name Kookaburra Cottage. They stripped the bed in silence, and Phoebe worked her way around the building, unwinding windows and dusting as April fetched fresh linen. Sunshine and rest do the world a good, don't they? Phoebe said, as if reading her mind. I can see why half of Britain spends a gap year down under. What are the facilities like in town? I've not explored it carefully yet. It's just your regular country town. A couple of pubs and primary schools, a high school, a few shops, police, fire station, post office, lots of wineries. And a hospital? Phoebe looked across at April as she asked the question, another of those bright smiles on her face while she waited for an answer. The neckline of April's shirt felt tight as she realized where Phoebe was heading. Please don't tell me you want to settle in my town. Yep, a tiny little hospital, she said lightly, working hard to maintain a poker face. Phoebe was the epitome of efficient, tucking the sheets with hospital corners so sharp they wouldn't dare come loose. Doesn't take long to clean, Phoebe said, fluffing the linen cushions on the sofa and draping the Angora throw rug over the arm. And it really is a gorgeous spot to stay between the vines. I can see why you've got so many bookings. April accepted the praise with a silent nod. She swiped a damp mop across the floorboards, admiring the rich grain in the recycled timber, and remembering the splinters and blood blisters that had come with laying the tongue-and-groove flooring. I nearly pulled out of the renovations at one stage, she told Phoebe about the budget and timeline overrun, hoping to highlight the blood, sweat, and tears that had gone into the project. But I'm glad we forged ahead. Really glad. Phoebe smiled, pulling Connor's car keys from her handbag. You just know when something's worth fighting for, don't you? When Connor and I got engaged, I wasn't really sure we'd weather all the storms. But sometimes those rocky bits make you a stronger person. April upended the mop bucket onto the lawn. She looked up and caught Phoebe staring towards the winery, her expression as transparent as the freshly washed windows. Of course, she still loves him. April steadied herself on the windowsill, the realization sapping the strength from her body. What did that mean for her and Connor? Later, when Phoebe had gone and Lauren called for an update, she ran the conundrum past her best friend. If it were me, I'd be telling Phoebe she can go jump, said Lauren. I'm tempted to, April replied, but they've been through such tough times and, like it or not, she represents everything about his life in the UK. What if I'm standing in the way of true love? April kneeled over her vegetable garden, phone jammed between her ear and her shoulder, tugging at little outliers of self-sown grass with more force than necessary. So what? You willing to sacrifice your own happiness for Phoebe? Lauren sounded unconvinced. People go through bad stuff all the time, April, but it doesn't mean a person with a traumatic background should take what they want regardless of the impact on everyone else. He's your boyfriend. Remember that first and foremost. I know. April paused. Connor had given her no reason to mistrust him. But she'd been wrong about Justin, hadn't she? She grabbed a handful of milk thistles, realizing too late they were entwined with stinging nettles. Her hand smarted, and her eyes prickled as she tossed them into the bucket. But if his heart is tied up with Phoebe, it's fruitless for me to flog a dead horse, isn't it? Our relationship can't thrive if he's still even partly in love with her. Lauren had no more answers than she did. So when they hung up, April upended the weeds onto the compost pile and sagged against the bull bar of her ute, feeling a sudden urge to let down the tires and go hooning up razorback sand dunes again. It felt like a safer bet than dwelling on the murky uncertainties of the heart. While most of his students were away on holidays and had opted to pause their piano lessons until the new year, there were still 3 keen pianists to teach the day before New Year's Eve. Between the scales and the set pieces, the Morley sisters were full of chatter about Christmas presents, beach trips, and fireworks displays.
Our dad said the fireworks will scare the crayfish right out of the cray pots, Ali said.
Her sister Grace chimed in.
It's going to be the best night. Are you going to Beachport or Mount Gambier?
Fireworks on the jetty at Beachport. Wouldn't miss it, Connor answered, putting away their music folders. It was quiet in the clubrooms after the girls left, and with an hour before he was due in town for the final lesson of the day, he found himself reaching for the sheet music. His shoulders relaxed the moment he sat down on the piano stool, and after the stop-start rhythm of the children's exercises, it was a joy to hear music flowing from his fingertips. He played the piece once, then ran through it again, faster this time. Then he closed his eyes, conjuring up the pieces he knew off by heart. When he finished the final notes of Für Elise, a gentle clapping sounded from the doorway. He turned to see Phoebe silhouetted against the bright sunlight. "It's been years since I heard you play," she said softly, crossing the room. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it sounds." Connor studied his hands, remembering the final performance in London before the accident that had changed everything. It had been flawless, not a missed note. If he hadn't been so pleased with himself, if he'd used the wrong pedal or fumbled with the sheets, maybe he wouldn't have celebrated so hard, and maybe he could have driven like he'd planned. He grimaced, and Phoebe sat down beside him on the piano stool. "It's not your fault, Con. You know that, right?" Phoebe said, as if she could read his thoughts. "I didn't plan on getting into an accident, just like I didn't mean for everything to happen with Xavier. But I've forgiven myself for that. Can you say the same thing? We didn't know things would change forever that night, but they did, and we're still here. Nobody else has been through what we have. That's why we're so good together. We felt that pain, moved through that grief. We promised we'd never forget." Connor shook his head. "Couldn't forget if I tried. And trust me, there was a while when I gave it my best shot. But I don't think that's what we should hang our hats on. We want different things, Phoebe. I'm happy here in Australia." The conversation fell into a lull. "Do you love her?" she asked quietly. He ran his fingers along the keys, not comfortable sharing that level of detail with Phoebe. "We're taking things slowly, but it feels right, you know. A fresh start. That's if she'll have me." "She'll be lucky to have you," Phoebe sighed, resting her hands on the keys too. "Do you know, when we found out we were having a boy, I would picture the two of you playing piano together, side by side on the stool." She tapped the keys cautiously, and he recognized the first few bars of Chopsticks, the only tune she remembered despite his many attempts to teach her others. He reached across and adjusted her fingers. "Try starting there," he said gently, joining in at the far end of the piano. It took a few attempts, but finally they got the tune right. Connor closed the lid and stepped out from the stool, giving Phoebe time to wipe her eyes. She stood, her eyes welling again. "So that's that then?" Connor reached out and folded her into a hug, feeling her shoulders heaving against his chest. He nodded, blinking away the burning in his eyes. "That's that," he said softly. "20. A text buzzed in April's pocket, and she pulled the phone out, hoping it was Connor. But instead there was a photo of Fergus and Lauren pulling funny faces at the camera, with snorkeling gear and an azure beach in the background. "Club Med, brilliant. BTW, Fergus says he'll be happy to stink out the rental with boiled haggis and leave the toilet seat up if need be when he gets home. Hashtag unwanted guest eviction tricks 101. XX Lauren." The message made April feel a little better, but she was still frowning at the phone when Archie appeared at the edge of the driveway.
"I can't wait for the midnight fireworks tomorrow, April. All that music and the markets and the lollies. Does Connor like donuts or fairy floss best? Or maybe we'll just get both."
Mishka jumped to her feet and bounded over to the young boy, who looked like he'd grown an inch since April had last seen him. Archie went straight to his veggie patch, inspecting the plants closely for signs of snail and slug damage as he awaited her reply. "Not sure, mate," April said. Connor had told her he'd planned something for tomorrow night, but seeing as she hadn't heard from him all day, she wasn't sure exactly what it involved. Hopefully not another awkward catch-up with Phoebe. She wasn't sure if she mentioned it aloud, but she froze when Phoebe's name rolled off Archie's lips. "What was that?" She kneeled down beside Archie. His hands were moving fast over the mulched soil, locating and removing weeds with a twist of his wrist.
"Phoebe said Connor loves fireworks. They never missed the New Year's Eve fireworks back in England. For 5 years, they took Connor's little sisters and ate fairy floss and hot jam donuts and watched the fireworks lying on a picnic rug, blankets heaped over them."
April was glad she was already kneeling, because Archie's snippet of information made her feel a little woozy, and his excited chatter about carnival food washed over her as she imagined trying to top 5 years of traditions. 5 years of Connor and Phoebe huddled together on a picnic rug, marveling at the fireworks. 5 years of Christmas mornings, family jazz concerts, long weekend lie-ins and Easter egg hunts. She'd known Connor for almost a year, and they'd only been together for half that time. How could she possibly compete with 5 years? Of course Phoebe would win him back.
You all right, April? You look a bit like Marty when the shearer clipped that little green ring around his knackers.
Archie grinned, then frowned, studying her nervously.
You and Connor are both coming to the fireworks, right? Or is that just something he does with Phoebe?
He scratched his head, leaving a smear of dirt on his freckled forehead.
Or something he used to do with Phoebe? Do you think she'll be here for my birthday? Maybe she'll give me a tortoise too.
April breathed out slowly. Focus, April, focus. She nodded mutely, then shook her head, blinking rapidly as she mustered up a bright smile for Archie. Hard to say, buddy. And speaking of animals, I think I saw the new lambs in the vineyard again. Can you be a gem and go and have a look for me?
Again?
Archie slapped a hand on his thigh, his brow furrowing.
I thought they'd stopped escaping,
he said, getting to his feet quickly.
I'll go and scout 'em out. The Shiraz grapes or the Chardonnay?
Chardonnay, she whispered. It was the furthest away from the winemaker's cottage, which would give her plenty of time to pull herself together. By the time Archie returned, looking bewildered about the missing sheep, she'd made a decision. I need to head off, mate, she said, climbing into the Hilux and waving goodbye. She stopped a minute later at the winery. He's not here, said Fran with a raised eyebrow. Doesn't he teach on Thursdays? Feeling like a scatterbrain, April drove to the golf club. There was music pouring through the clubroom windows when she parked, and she sat still for a moment, letting the classical piece flow over her. Connor was private about his music, never playing more than a few bars in her presence. But in the hot, dusty car park, it was impossible to ignore how talented he was. The music stopped and April leaned forward, letting her head rest on the steering wheel as she ran over what she'd say. The questions she needed answered. Was there a future for them? Was she enough to keep him in Australia long term, or would he always be beholden to his past? And if Phoebe was to settle in Australia, as she'd inferred, how would that impact their relationship? Right, you've got this. The backs of April's sweaty legs felt stuck to the leather seat cover, and she was sure her work clothes were as disheveled as her thoughts. But she was determined as she opened the car door and stepped into the dry, eucalyptus-scented heat. A few hesitant notes rang through the air. April paused. There were no other cars in the car park, so it wasn't another student. Laughter came next, and when she moved to the window, April could see Phoebe and Connor, shoulder to shoulder, playing a 2-part tune. Chopsticks. It wasn't complicated, nor was it beautiful, but there was something about the way they played it together that held such gravity. With a thick throat and blurry vision, April ran back to the car. Connor walked Phoebe back to the golf course house, glancing at his watch as he made her a cup of tea. I'm due in town in a minute. Will you be all right by yourself? She nodded quietly, accepting the mug with both hands. I think so. I'll look at flights, see if I can book a few nights in Sydney or Melbourne before I head home. She gave him a wry smile. I'd quietly hoped I'd be booking 2 seats for the return leg, but looks like it'll just be me. Connor unhooked his car keys from the rack by the back door. You're young and fit, Phoebes. You've got so much to look forward to. A handsome doctor might sweep you off your feet and you'll have your own tribe of little doctors and nurses before you know it. She shook her head. I can't put myself through that again, she said. Not after last time. Connor had a job hiding his surprise. Losing Xavier was the hardest thing he'd ever endured, but he couldn't imagine not trying again. Every time he pictured his future, he imagined it filled with the chaos and comfort of family. "I'm sorry, Phoebe. For everything," he said softly, slipping out the door. He headed into town for the final lesson of the night. Like Archie, young Selena Hughes had her own piano. Unlike Archie, she wasn't musically gifted, but what she lacked in talent, she made up for with enthusiasm. Selena was just as excited about the New Year's Eve celebrations as the Morley sisters and Archie.
There's a street party too, with markets and everything, said Selena. I'm helping Nana in her van. She doesn't let me use the coffee machine yet, but I'm good at taking the orders and giving change.
Connor looked at the tween and then at her mother, Fiona, wondering how he'd overlooked the resemblance. "I've been teaching you piano for 6 months now, and I completely missed this. Your Nana is matchmaking Coffee Van Jean." Fiona laughed.
I'm not sure there's another Jean quite like her, she said, walking him to the door. You seem to have settled in well, I hear. Mum had bold plans for fixing you up with a new primary school teacher, but I'm not sure she was fast enough.
He grinned. "Speaking of which, I better get back before April sends out a search party. See you at the street party tomorrow."
Oh, Connor, before you leave, how do I go about booking the B&B? My folks have a special wedding anniversary coming up, and after giving Mum a vacuum for Christmas, Dad's got some ground to make up.
He fossicked around in the glove box and handed her one of April's new flyers. "Didn't realise there'd be such a market for anniversaries. The guests staying tomorrow night is celebrating their 40th anniversary." Connor left town feeling a whole lot better than he had on the way in. As he drove, he hoped that if he were lucky enough to have a girl like April by his side in 40 years' time, he'd be the type of bloke who was still thinking about ways to keep the romance alive. April clutched the neck of her guitar, playing every song in her limited repertoire. But the distraction of strumming, singing, and plucking at the strings was short-lived. The moment she returned the guitar to its stand, the grief for the life she'd imagined intensified. "This is like Justin all over again, only worse. I can't compete with their history or their connection." April paced the small cottage that had always felt like a haven, wanting to banish everything that reminded her of Connor. But she knew there'd barely be anything left in the house if she did so. The Monstera pot plants she'd grafted while Connor read a book on the couch beside her, the rug they'd sat cross-legged on while picking bindies from Mishka's coat, the coffee table they'd rested their feet on while they watched movies. As much as she willed it to, a scented, scorching hot bath didn't offer the usual respite either. How could I have been so wrong about Connor? Am I the only one who didn't realize he was making a fool of me with his ex all over again? The humiliation was just as painful as the loss of the future she'd imagined for the two of them. Mishka whined at the edge of the bath. "I didn't want it to end this way either, Mish," she said, her eyes filling again. When it felt like she'd exhausted her supply of tears, April sank down into the water until her hair swirled around her, letting out slow breaths so she could focus on the bubbles forming. A knocking from outside set off a fresh round of barking, and when she surfaced, Mishka was racing between the front door and the bathroom door, her toenails clattering on the floorboards and sliding on the tiles. "Mishka," came Connor's deep voice, "did you miss me, girl? Go tell him it's over, you great big coward." Fighting the urge to sink under the water and see how long she could hold her breath again, April hauled herself out of the tub, wrapped herself in a bathrobe, and twirled her hair into a towel turban. Would he be man enough to admit there was still something between him and Phoebe? Or would he do what Justin had done and pretend it was all in her imagination? "I'm not falling for that again," she told herself, dabbing her face with a cold flannel. When she walked into the lounge, her resolve to tell him exactly what she'd seen at the golf club wavered. "Hey, what's up?" His concern was so convincing she almost fell for it. She yearned to lean into it and have him tell her it was all a misunderstanding. Closing her eyes, April conjured up the memory of Phoebe and Connor playing the piano side by side an hour earlier, purposely letting it wound her all over again. Even if Connor and Phoebe weren't together now, Their bond was like a ticking time bomb. It was just a matter of time, and better if she got in first. The cleaner the break and the sooner it was done, the better. "I made a mistake, Connor," she said, walking to the door with as much dignity as she could muster. "I should have known better than to confuse a fling for a real relationship. You probably weren't even planning to stay in Australia." She saw him flinch at the word fling and knew it had hit the intended target. He opened his mouth to reply, but she cut over the top of him. "In fact, that's probably beside the point." His confused expression reflected her own turbulent thoughts. A lock of wet hair had escaped from the towel, and he swept it off her forehead before feeling her temperature. The tender gesture was almost her undoing. "Are you coming down with something? We've got Daniel's pre-New Year's party tonight and the Beachport fireworks tomorrow, but I'm not going if you're not." He looked flustered now, and April struggled to harden her heart against the pain. "But stop! Please, just stop!" April cut him off, knowing exactly how the excuses went. Justin had rolled them all out before he left. "But I didn't mean to hurt you. But I can't help how I feel. But I wouldn't have looked elsewhere if you hadn't." "Clearly we need to talk," Connor said, reaching for her hand. She yanked it away like he'd stung her. "Just go, Connor. Go to Daniel's party, go back to the golf club, go back to England if that's what you really want. I just need you gone right now." He gaped at her, equal parts hurt and shocked, then turned and walked away. Shutting the door behind him, April sank to the ground. Sobs racked her body. Mishka paced a semicircle around her, whining uneasily and lapping at her tears before eventually flopping to the floor beside her. "It'll be better tomorrow, Mish," she sobbed, wishing she could convince herself of that. When she finally dragged herself into bed, April numbly checked her emails, then logged 2 new bookings into her calendar and replied to a message from her incoming guest, Mr. Henderson. "No worries about your late arrival tomorrow. The keys will be in the key safe and I'll leave the air conditioning on so it's cool. Happy 40th wedding anniversary." It was an effort to inject enthusiasm into the message. She switched off the light, silent tears running down her cheeks. Connor drove to Daniel Winkland's house on autopilot, his eyes on the road ahead, but his mind reeling from April's bombshell. The last week had been tough with Phoebe's unexpected arrival, and he thought he'd sheltered her from the worst of it. But April hadn't even let him explain. "You didn't deserve April anyway, you already knew that." He crested the hill, groaning at the sight of sheep spread across the road. So much for my brilliant shortcut. The farmer on a quad bike zipped back and forth, waving a hat in the air as a pair of working dogs raced around, trying to muster the skittish livestock. Connor braked, unsure whether he was supposed to keep driving or wait for them to go back into whatever paddock they'd escaped from. He'd come across mobs like this before, grazing on the roadside or crossing from one property to the next. When it had happened previously, he'd been happy to take in the scenes of ridgy-dig Aussie farm life. But after the emotional conversation with Phoebe, and then April's rejection, he felt as scattered as the livestock. Drawing to a stop, Connor lowered his window. A warm, sheep-scented breeze filtered in, and he rested his forehead on the car's doorframe, feeling like his brain was in a slowly tightening vice. How could he have ruined things with April? Why didn't he notice things were terribly wrong before now? The quad bike rumbled towards him, with a border collie on the front and another behind the driver. "Pull yourself together, man." Connor swiped at his cheeks and blew out a deep breath. "G'day, mate. They're a bit skittish, so if you could take it slowly and stick to the left, that'd be gold." The farmer flipped the visor of his helmet, spearing Connor with a sharp look. "You right?" Connor rubbed his chest like it would dislodge the pain and wash away the acid in his throat. "Fine," he lied, inching the car away. A party was the last thing he felt like, but April had made it clear he wasn't welcome at the cottage, and he didn't feel like returning to Phoebe at the golf course house either. At least at Daniel's there would be beer, or perhaps even something stronger, So he kept driving, eventually pulling up at a small property on the outskirts of town. "Geez, I was worried nobody'd show up," said Daniel, clapping him on the shoulder when he walked inside. "Bloody glad you could make it. Come and meet my new partner." It wasn't until after he'd introduced Phil and a handful of uni graduates who'd arrived in the district that month that Dan realised Connor had come alone. "Don't tell me April's crook too. Everyone's fallen like flies," Daniel said, showing Connor to the makeshift bar. "Wine, beer or spirits, help yourself, and there's a swag and spare room in case anyone needs to kip here the night." Connor cracked a can of scotch and dry, the strongest thing on offer, and settled by the fire pit to drown his sorrows. The young winemakers were full of enthusiasm about their new careers and lifestyles, and Connor felt old and cynical listening to the animated discussions about their raucous New Year's plans. "We'll ring it in with an all-nighter for sure," said one bloke, who looked too young for shaving, let alone recreational drugs. "How about you, Connor? You getting on it?" "Not sure. My girlfriend and I were planning on taking Daniel's little brother Archie to the fireworks in Beachport." He took another swig of his drink, not wanting to face the possibility that the new year and beyond mightn't involve April.
Seriously? That's the raw end of the deal, getting stuck babysitting on New Year's Eve, one of the girls replied. Danny's probably planned the trip to the city to avoid it. I know which night I'd prefer.
Connor gave a dry laugh. It probably seemed dull from a 20-year-old's perspective, but he'd been looking forward to it ever since Archie had asked. Seeing in the new year with the woman he loved by his side, even in the company of their enthusiastic young neighbour, had sounded pretty perfect to him. Daniel served salad and spit-roasted pork around the fire pit, and Connor quietly drank his way through most of Daniel's scotch cans and stumbled into the spare room early, much to the amusement of the young vintners. "The night's still young," Daniel cried, determined to keep the party alive. Connor crawled into bed and tried April's number. There was no answer. Connor splashed water on his face and downed a cup of coffee the next morning, hoping the greasy bacon and egg roll would help soak up the alcohol. "Thanks for the bed, mate. I owe you a few cans, too." Daniel waved his offer away. "You're doing me a favour tonight with those fireworks. Archie hasn't let up about it all week. Besides, I'm sure you and April will have us around for a barbie before the summer's out, now that you're on the cooking bandwagon." Connor looked at his phone. He tried April's number again first thing in the morning, before his pounding hangover had a chance to kick in. Still no answer. Phil walked in at that moment, looking a little rough around the edges, and Connor was grateful for the interruption. He slipped away, taking the back roads to the winery. There was no sign of April at the cottage or the bed and breakfast, so he wandered through the vineyards, assessing the grapes for the very last time that year, before putting in a few hours inside the winery. It was quiet in there, too, with Fran and Lloyd away, and he made strong progress on the paperwork he'd been putting off all week. If he hadn't been looking for the post-it notes, he mightn't have noticed the report on Lloyd's desk. But as soon as he clapped eyes on it, he couldn't help but read it cover to cover. A sad smile crossed Connor's lips. The winery was tracking better in this quarter than it had for the previous 2 years. "April's hard work is paying off," he murmured. If she'd seen the report, she was keeping mighty quiet about it. Maybe she had planned to surprise him with the good news tonight, when they were watching the clock run down to midnight. Connor's phone rang, and he jumped to answer it. "Phoebe?" Last they'd spoken, she was going to text him her departure time so he could take her to the airport in the next day or two. "Did you get an earlier flight?" Her voice was just a whisper. "Do you happen to have any headache tablets? I've a migraine." Connor hadn't forgotten how debilitating Phoebe's migraines were if they weren't nipped in the bud. And even though Phoebe's arrival had thrown everything into a spin, he couldn't ignore her plea for help. He wasn't sure which medication they had at the rental, but as he glanced at his watch, he knew there was a slim chance he could make the chemist before it shut. He leaped into the Camry and raced back to town. Phoebe was curled up in the bed with the curtains drawn when he arrived with a bag from the chemist. "What can I do?" She whimpered. "Earplugs.
eye mask, painkillers.
He gently doled out the supplies and fetched her a glass of water. She accepted them with a grateful grimace.
I don't want to miss my flight. It's booked for late tomorrow afternoon.
Connor strained to hear her tiny voice. It was in his best interests that she caught that flight too, and he was going to do everything possible to smooth the path. It's not like I've got anywhere else to be. The thought sat like a stone in his guts as he closed the bedroom door and scanned the share house. If he was going to be there a while, keeping an eye on Phoebe, he may as well put the time to good use. Connor swept and scrubbed surfaces as soundlessly as he could. Then he opened the freezer and pulled out the provisions he'd bought after one of Geraldine's cooking lessons. Rather than talking things over with April, maybe he could show her. 21. Beachport's street market was in full swing when April and Archie rolled into town on New Year's Eve. Knowing the main street would be blocked off and that parking would be chaos in the town centre, April pulled up by the inlet drain and they followed the boardwalk into town. Archie rattled off the names engraved on the bollards, his excited chatter a welcome distraction from the wrenching feeling that came over April whenever she thought about Connor. She wasn't sure if she was relieved or disappointed that he'd stayed away last night. But after months of his warmth and the soft snuffling noises he made in his sleep, the bed had felt cavernous and cold. April hugged her arms around herself, pulling the sides of her knit cardigan taut, and reminded herself it was for the best. A smarter woman would have stepped aside days ago. A smarter woman would have discussed long-term plans instead of worrying about rocking the boat. She'd missed another call from Connor before they left, and though she hadn't expected him to join them for New Year's, not after she'd pushed him away, it was still hard to read the follow-up text message saying he wouldn't make it.
Chambers, Redden, Hales, Mackenzie, Watson, Archie said, pausing to read the faded lettering. Do you think there's a Winkland bollard too?
April dragged her attention back to her young friend. Maybe, she said, looking at the names more carefully as they walked. Though most of these posts were bought by locals to help fundraise for this timber path, they wouldn't be here without the community's support.
Just like the Penwara show, Archie said. Less than 100 days to go now. I've asked Mum if I can enter more things this year. Only one kid entered the photography last time and he got invited to exhibit in the Royal Adelaide show. Imagine that!
They spent the rest of the walk discussing their entries, and April couldn't help but laugh when Archie declared he was determined to win a prize in every category. You can probably fill all the categories, she said, as long as you remember it's about participating, not winning. The town was a hive of activity, slowing their progress through the market. There was a range of food options, from baked potatoes and dumplings to sausage sizzles and locally made kranskis. After a chili and cheese kranski, an ice cream from the strawberry van, and not one but 3 lucky dips, Archie and April found themselves at the plant stall. Archie, this is Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, she said, greeting the elderly couple sitting behind a sea of potted plants, veggie seedlings, and homemade worm juice fertilizer.
How's your garden, April? Are you expecting another clean sweep of the produce section come March?
April shook her head. I was just telling Archie here about the perils of expecting a ribbon on show day. Everyone's in with a shot. Too right, said Mr. Cooper, nodding at Archie. Every show and every season is unique. I've been involved in more shows than you've had hot breakfasts, young man, and you never know how it's going to pan out. But we love seeing the younger crowd getting involved, and they're always looking for committee members and volunteers. How are you on a ladder? Archie looked between the 3 adults, trying to work out whether Mr. Cooper was serious or not.
I haven't had much to do with ladders, but I'm good at catching sheep.
He's also a whiz in the garden. His tomatoes were fruiting before mine this month, April said.
I'm sure the committee can find something for you if you're at a loose end in the holidays, Archie. The poultry pavilion needs work, not to mention the gardens around the hall. We want the place sparkling for the 100th anniversary, said Mrs. Cooper. A little birdie told me you've got a new beau, April, and from the look of that glorious stone entrance at your winery, he's good with his hands.
Her stomach dropped, and April was struggling to think of a suitable reply when Archie piped up.
Oh yeah, Connor's awesome at everything. He's a piano teacher, he makes wine, and you should see him work in a drop saw. Mr. Lacey says he's an all-rounder, and even though he's not great at catching sheep, he's getting better. He loves fireworks too, just like me, but he's not here tonight because he's looking after Phoebe, Archie said. They were going to get married ages ago. She's still got the ring and everything.
That's how Connor was spending the night? With Phoebe? April wasn't sure which was worse. That news or the fact Phoebe still had her engagement ring. Her voice came out gruffly. I'm not sure Mr. and Mrs. Cooper need that level of detail, Arch. She looked up to see the Coopers exchanging a meaningful glance. April grabbed Archie's shoulder and pointed him towards the coffee van, making a hasty retreat. You don't need to give everybody every piece of information you have, Archie, she said, regretting her sharp tone when she saw his face fall. She joined the line and tried again, more gently this time. Connor's background isn't anyone else's business but his own, mate.
But he is really good at lots of things, Archie insisted. If he was my age, we'd be best mates. I just know it.
April nodded, smoothing Archie's collar. Hers wouldn't be the only broken heart when Connor returned to England. At the front of the line, April ordered a coffee for herself and a hot chocolate for Archie. Extra marshmallows, please, Jean, she said, hoping Archie would respond to the olive branch.
No Connor tonight, then?
Jean asked. April looked at Archie, willing him to stay silent. To his credit, Archie made a discreet zipping his lips gesture and stepped up to the counter.
Hey, Jean, look what I got from the Lucky Dip, said Archie,
twisting the Rubik's Cube this way and that. Jean smiled at him, frothing the milk, then turned her curious gaze to April.
Now you know I don't like meddling, April,
said Jean. April gritted her teeth, knowing these lines always preceded unwanted advice.
But I've heard some whispers about an extra guest at the golf course house, and I don't want you to be the last to know.
If only I was bold enough to give Jean the same lecture I just gave Archie. It's fine, Jean. I'm well aware of the situation. It's all good. April feigned a brightness she didn't feel.
I've known you since you were in nappies, pet, and I'd hate to see you get hurt, that's all.
Too late for that. Jean handed over the coffee.
Now, if you stick around a minute, I'll introduce you to my great-nephew, Jack. He's just moved back to town. Lovely lad, and he's easy on the eye, too. A better fit than Connor, I suspect.
April took the coffee and held out her hand for the hot chocolate. Sorry, we've got a dash.
Oh, there he is. Yoo-hoo, Jack!
Eager to escape Jean's radar and slink away as quickly as possible, April mumbled an apologetic sorry to the bloke striding towards Jean's coffee van with a crate full of milk and walked away as fast as she could. Going through the motions would only encourage Jean further. Besides, her heart was already in tatters.
Wait, April,
said Archie, trotting to keep pace with her. She slowed, but only a little, determined to find a fireworks vantage point without a Penwarra local within eyesight. Just me again, April. Connor paused, the phone still at his ear as he looked at the ingredients spread across the kitchen bench in front of him. I guess you're on the way to Beachport now. Tell Archie to make a wish on the biggest firework for me. Sorry again. I really wish I was there with you both, and I do want to talk. Anytime you're ready, I'll be here. He set down the phone, gave the bench one last spritz of antibacterial spray, and set to work. Nina Simone crooned in his headphones as he silently separated eggs, whisked milk, and measured caster sugar until the custard was glop, glop, glopping on the stovetop. The cooking implements Fergus had acquired in the last few months, mostly from the church op shop that April was so fond of, weren't as fancy as the tools Geraldine kept in her commercial kitchen, nor were they all matching like the ones April had recently invested in, but they did the trick. The custard was almost at the Vaseline-like thickness Geraldine had told them to watch out for. He retrieved the puff pastry from the freezer, sandwiched the squares between sheets of baking paper, and placed a second baking tray on top. He just slid the pastry into the oven when he smelled burning. Connor turned back to the stove quickly, but when he lifted the wooden spoon, he saw the bottom of the custard was well and truly scorched. Sod it. He looked at the mixture, then back at the pastry in the oven. Maybe I can salvage the top half of the custard, and the vanilla slice will just be smaller. But a quick taste confirmed the scorched aroma that now filled the kitchen was infused through the custard, too. Taking the mess outside and scraping it onto the grass where the birds could eat it, Connor washed up and started again. He watched the custard with an eagle eye this time, remembering to remove it from the heat once the consistency was perfect. He set it aside to cool and checked on Phoebe. Even though she was asleep, she still looked unwell, and her face was pale against the navy sheets. He returned to the kitchen and opened the windows, letting the breeze chase the burnt smell away, then checked the pastry. Just like Geraldine had told them, the weight of the top baking tray stopped the pastry from puffing up. Bang on, he said to himself as he assembled the slice, then drizzled it with the icing and started on the cleanup. Finding a container of vanilla slice in her fridge with an apology note on top mightn't make up for upsetting April or missing their first New Year's together, but he hoped it would make her smile when she got home. He was stopped for a breathalyzer in the main street on his way through Pemwara. Big night tonight? The young constable asked. He gestured to the plastic container on the passenger seat. Never thought I'd say this, but I've spent the evening baking. You're pulling my leg. She laughed, hooting even louder when Connor lifted the lid to showcase the neat, glossy slices with their creamy filling. That's not something we see very often on New Year's, especially from your age demographic. Keep up the good work. The smile was still on Connor's face when he turned at Lacewing Estate, but it vanished when he realised there were more lights than normal on at Kookaburra Cottage. And not just lights, but people. What the hell? Not only was there a bonfire roaring in front of the stables where guests normally parked their cars, but there were dozens, no, maybe 100 people swarming around the cottage and through the vines.
Wow, look at that one,
said Archie, scrambling to his feet and nearly upending the picnic basket in the process. Even though he'd already snapped dozens of photos on Daniel's old iPhone, he pointed the camera to the sky once again and tried to capture the fireworks.
There's got to be a show-winning shot in there, surely,
he said, collapsing back onto the rug with an indefatigable grin on his face.
My phone's full now, so I guess it's too bad if I didn't get a good one.
He shuffled closer, resting his head on her shoulder.
I thought fireworks made everyone happy, April. Don't you like them?
She gestured at the fairy floss wrappers, crumpled donut bag, and empty coffee cups. Sugar coma, she said, hoping he'd buy the explanation. Archie pulled back, studying her.
If it makes you feel better, I wish Connor was here too. I know I'm just a kid, but I think he likes you heaps better than Phoebe. For one thing, she squealed when the lambs came close, making him even more skittish, and she doesn't make him laugh like you do. I'm going to tell him that next time I see him too.
April was touched by his comments. You're a trooper, Archie boy. But don't you worry about all that stuff, okay, mate? Hey, check out that one. He looked at the firework crackling and fizzing over the ocean, but she could see his mind was still churning over the issue. What do you say we get one more jam donut on the way out, and I'll get a photo of you with the fireworks in the background so you can show your folks tomorrow. She pulled her phone out, her breath catching at the sight of more missed calls from Connor. Tomorrow. I'll deal with it tomorrow, she told herself, minimizing the notifications and opening her camera app. Who the hell's in charge around here? Connor wanted a megaphone so he could yell over the horrid clash of music. He hadn't got any sense out of the first group he'd passed on the way in, but as he strode through the crowd towards the stables, 3 things were instantly, sickeningly clear. Most of the kids were underage, their faces covered in acne and poorly applied makeup. There was alcohol everywhere, and some of the kids were too drunk to even try to hide it. And finally, they were trashing the place. There were countless clusters of teenagers, each little group with their own portable speaker, so it was like walking through a mosh pit. Some of the kids were as young as Pippin, many in clinches that could hardly be considered consenting given their age and inebriation, and those who weren't pashing or drinking were glued to phone screens. I can deal with this, Connor told himself. They're just kids, really, who need to be sent on their way. He cringed at the sight of a throng of teenage boys standing in the middle of April's herb garden, with no regard for the rows of perfectly weeded and mulched plants underfoot, as they watched a brawny lad chugging beer from his shoe. "Shooey! Shooey! Shooey!" chanted the group, hollering with laughter as the lad finished and stumbled, his t-shirt catching on the roses. "Serves you right, you bloody idiot," Connor muttered as the young man got too close to the rose thorns. "Get off the garden, you lot," he said, flapping his hands. But the laughter petered out, and when they turned, indignant that someone dare tell them what to do, Connor saw they were just as tall as he was. His skills in piano playing, winemaking, and baking were useless in the face of drunk, testosterone-heavy young man. "What do you say? This garden?" The tallest boy, who had a barrel chest and arms twice as thick as Connor's had ever been, lifted a foot and stomped on the coriander, then kicked at a tuft of parsley until it flew through the air. Connor took a sharp breath and walked away. He pulled his phone from his pocket. April's phone rang out and he looked over to the winery. More cars were pulling in off the highway. He needed to stop this now. He tried April again, then dialed Heidi's number. "Heids, thank God." He quickly explained the situation. "Gate crashes," she said. "Kids have a party, their friends see it on snap maps, and the gate crashes start rolling in. Why did April rent it to an underage kid on New Year's Eve anyway?" Connor explained how the New Year's booking had come through the moment the cottage accommodation site went live. April's not that daft. It was booked by an old couple. They had a milestone anniversary to celebrate. The husband was surprising his wife. He surveyed the mass of people. Bollocks. Where are they in this crowd? Heidi gave a grim laugh. "I bet you 20 quid it was a bogus booking. Happens all the time. You need to pull the power and call the guards, obviously." "I don't know their number," he said. "I've never needed to call the Australian police until now." Heidi searched for the number as Connor walked around the stables, trying to remember which side the meter box was on. "Oh shit, they've started another fire," said Connor, panic setting in as he spotted a small bonfire. "Very original," said Heidi. "Wait, you best check inside first and warn them you're turning the power off." "Do they deserve warning?" Connor couldn't believe the suggestion. "They'd ruin the place by the second." "I know," Heidi said, her calmness infuriating. "But it's 2 stories, right? If someone breaks their neck on the staircase in the dark, you'll have a lawsuit on your hands." Connor was grateful for her advice, feeling even more useless as a wave of teens walked towards the bonfire. "No!" One of the boys had an armful of garden fencing that April, Archie, and Connor had spent hours making from twigs and vines. The other had the sawhorses that April had repurposed as the base of an outdoor table. He called the police station, giving details to a polite but evidently busy officer. "They've just packed up the Breatho station and they're out at a car accident, but I'm sure they'll be there as soon as they can. I've got your details, the complaint's lodged. Just sit tight." Sit tight? Connor jogged to the front door, determined to clear out the B&B so he could lock the door and protect the building, if not the surrounds. Much longer and they'd probably start heaping stools and coffee tables onto the bonfire. The sight inside didn't instill him with hope. Oh, Jesus. Connor swore at the plastic cups, bottles of spirits, chips, backpacks, and jackets strewn across the floorboards, the fug of cigarette smoke hovering around the group on the couch. "You need to go home," he said, pulling the television cord out at the wall. "The police are on their way." He said it as firmly but calmly as possible, when really he wanted to roar. The mention of the police had the desired effect, and it was only when they were off the couch that he saw a spray of bright red wine across the cream couch. A half-empty bottle sat beside the wood burner, the sparkling Shiraz April left out for guests. It'll break her heart to see this, he thought, his head spinning as he took the stairs 2 at a time, finding a couple in the bed. "Get dressed and get out," he yelled, throwing clothes in their direction and waiting at the bottom of the steps. The young pair at least had the good grace to look sheepish as they scampered out of the room. Whoever they were, Connor was pretty confident they weren't Mr. and Mrs. Henderson on their ruby wedding anniversary. Connor closed his eyes a bit, resisting the urge to clean up, and did a quick check of the bathroom, finding cigarette butts in the sink, a pot plant upended in the bathtub, and God knows what on the floor. With a silent prayer that they'd be able to get the stink out later, he locked the heavy oak doors behind him.
"Wait, what? I need a pee,"
giggled a girl, knocking on the front door even though she'd just watched him lock it.
"Hello? Anyone inside? Can you open the door?"
Connor bit back a reply and strode to the side of the stables, gripping his phone torch between his teeth as he opened the fuse box and shut off the power. The outdoor lights spluttered out, but the music continued. If he hadn't been standing there, racking his brains for the next best course of action, Connor might have missed the low diesel hum over the noise pumping from the portable speakers. And in the dim night, it took him a while to understand what the slow, hulking shape rumbling out of the lean-to was. The sound suddenly made sense. Dread and anger circled in his stomach as the Lacey's little Fergie tractor puttered along the laneway. Connor took off at a sprint. The drink driver ploughing into the winery or the vines was small fry compared to the potential damage they could do if they clipped someone in the crowd. And in the darkness, without headlights or seatbelts, he couldn't fathom them reaching the highway, especially since cars kept pausing and ejecting more and more teenagers. "Stop the tractor! Get off!" Connor panted when he finally drew level with the driver. The lad had a John Deere hat on, which may have instilled a little bit of hope in Connor had it not been for the fact he had a tinny in one hand and a girl sitting on his lap. "For fuck's sake, pull up!" Connor looked ahead, trying not to panic, as another boy loped towards them, hooting with amusement. He kept pace with the tractor, and for a moment Connor thought he was there to talk some sense into the driver. Instead, he ran in front and clumsily vaulted into the bucket. "Legend! Sick as Simo!" Legend? One misstep and the kid would have been flat as a pancake, thought Connor, too gobsmacked to process the repercussions. By now, they had a parade of followers. "Make him stop the bloody tractor!" Connor yelled, appealing to the girl on the driver's lap, who had started to look a little uncertain. "If he's stupid enough to ruin his own life, tell him to go right ahead, but he'll kill 3 people at this rate." He felt desperate now as they neared the road, and when they reached the stone entrance, Connor found himself cut off. Short of jumping over the rock wall he'd built with April and Archie, he'd have to chase around it, and by then, he'd be too late.
End of CD 8. CD 9.
22. April's heartbeat sped up as they approached the winery. Why was there blue and red flashing lights and a convoy of cars crawling past Lacewing Estate at a snail's pace, every one intent on rubbernecking despite the late hour? "Oh no," she murmured. Had someone veered off the highway and had an accident? A break-in at Lacewing Estate? Her first thought was for the guests celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary tonight, and although she knew it was selfish, she hoped the misdemeanor hadn't disturbed the happy couple in Kookaburra Cottage. Archie stirred in the back seat as she pulled up beside the police wagon. "What's happened?" April asked, jumping out of the ute. The officer turned his torch on her, and after clarifying she was the owner, gave a grimace. "We've been trying to call you," he said. April's mind flashed to the phone in the glove box, the battery dead from Archie filming the last of the fireworks. "Were you aware of this party?" April shook her head. "The long lunch isn't until tomorrow, and I wouldn't call it a party really, more fine dining." "There's been an underage party here," the policeman clarified, "at your B&B. Her eyes darted around the property. She'd been so fixated on the flashing lights that she hadn't noticed the beer cans and pre-mixed bottles littering the laneway. The rock fence. Behind the police car, she could see half the rocks were scattered around like discarded Lego blocks. Her hands flew to her mouth. What the? But I have guests tonight. It's their wedding anniversary. They're not teenagers. A false booking, we suspect. Underage gate crashes, alcohol, and the biggest night of the year. He shook his head and handed her a business card. Bad combo, I'm afraid. It's lucky no one was seriously hurt. Get in touch with the station tomorrow. Your insurance company will want a copy of our report. April rushed towards the stables. Was that a bonfire? A moan slipped from her mouth. She quickened her pace and was halfway there when the officer called her back. Miss, you've left a sleeping child in your car. I'd recommend getting him to bed and dealing with this later. Archie. Fighting back tears, she nodded, swiping her fringe from her eyes with trembling hands and returning to the ute. It was a struggle to drive past the glowing embers in the stable's car park and continue on to the Winklands' house. Rousing Archie was like trying to wake the dead. She hadn't even checked if Felicity and Rupert were home, or considered whether she was supposed to wait with Archie until they returned, when headlights flashed in the driveway. You had one hell of a party by the looks of things, Rupert laughed, stepping out of his car. I thought you and Archie were heading to Beachport. We did, April said weakly, then watched her neighbour's amusement turn to shock as she explained what had happened. Felicity put her hand on April's arm. Oh, how terrible. How bad's the damage? April looked across the laneway, resisting the urge to bury her head in her hands. I don't know, she said, but I'm about to find out. I'll come with you, said Rupert, his voice steely, just in case anyone's left. A string of swear words erupted from April's mouth when she saw the trampled gardens, the snapped standard roses, and the dining table chairs she sanded back and oiled to perfection lying haphazardly on the lawn. But it was nothing compared to the inside. April's knees buckled when she saw the damage, and then Rupert's arm was around her waist, keeping her upright. Upsy daisy, that's a girl. It'll be okay, he said, pulling out a stool. For some strange reason, she found herself laughing at the old-fashioned term, and as she surveyed the wine splatters on the couch and more on the walls, the broken glass in front of her, another laugh came, then another, before tears began pouring from her eyes. My cottage, she said, tears coming now in earnest. April! Through her tears, April saw Connor in the doorway, dirtier and more rumpled than she'd ever seen him, and her body ached for the comfort of his arms. The double whammy hit her then. Connor and Phoebe together. Her bed and breakfast ruined. Was there anything more that could be taken from her tonight? She sagged against the counter. I've been trying to call you, he said, his face stricken. Are you okay? She shook her head, weeping silently now. Connor swept a hand through his hair wearily. I'm so sorry. It was a nightmare here. I did what I could to help the police shut it down. And I finally got on to Daniel. He said we could move tomorrow's long lunch to Winklands estate if you think that'll work. Obviously only if that's okay with you, Rupert. Rupert nodded. The breath left April's lungs in a rush. The New Year's Day event. How could she get everything in order for the long lunch? Not only that, how on earth was the executive from Destination SA going to stay at the B&B when it looked like this? Connor started towards April, wanting to comfort her. But despite the shock, despite the agony of seeing months of hard work sullied in several short hours, she turned away from him. She doesn't want you. She can't even bear to look at you. Just as much as he wanted to clear up the mess, he wanted to sweep her into his arms and reassure her they'd fix it, together. But she stiffened at his touch and strode away from him across the room. We can get it fixed, April, Connor said. I've already been to your house and collected the cleaning stuff. That'll be the easy part after the effort it took to disperse the crowd. And it had been quite a task. Over 100 teenagers intent on partying hadn't left quietly. Although the rock wall entrance to Lacewing Estate had been collateral, there had been an upside of the collision. When the joyriders clipped the stone wall with the corner of the tractor bucket, the cheering had turned to screaming. This, combined with the yelling from the idiot hitching a ride inside the bucket, had cut through the night and lured the mob away from the stables. "I don't even know if we can fix this." April's voice cracked, and Connor felt her pain as she swiped at her eyes. "I appreciate you shutting the party down, Connor, and you coming across with me, Rupert, but this is my problem. I'll take care of it from here." She gulped, tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the damage. "Or I'll just cancel everything in the morning," she said, burying her head in her hands. And without a backwards glance, she pushed past Connor and slipped out into the night. "April!" An owl hooted from a gum tree, and he heard the lambs across the laneway calling. But there was no response from April. "Are you going to lock up? Suppose there's not much more damage that can be done," said Rupert, with a wistful glance around the room. Connor ducked outside to collect the cleaning supplies and shook his head. "There's a chance we can fix this, and I'm not leaving until I've had a crack." And to his surprise, Rupert rolled up his white shirt sleeves and gave a nod. "I'll give you a hand for a bit," he said, taking the roll of garbage bags from Connor's hand. Connor wasn't sure when Rupert switched the music on, but somewhere between scrubbing wine off the wall and stripping the bed sheets, the sound of Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 2 in F minor floated up to the mezzanine. "Been years since I've tried to get wine out of a couch. Not my forte, I'm afraid," said Rupert, tossing a scarlet-soaked rag in the bucket. He eyed the cracked picture frame Connor was carrying downstairs. "Is that an old map of the region?" "I gave it to April for Christmas," Connor sighed, "so it spent less than a week hanging on the walls." "At least the print isn't damaged, just needs new glass," said Rupert. He picked up his phone and wished Connor good luck before heading home for the night. Connor sat the artwork by the oak doors and tried not to draw parallels between the shattered glass and the state of his relationship with April. 10 minutes later, as Connor was continuing to write to the bedroom, April returned to the stables wearing her gardening clothes, with an armful of extra supplies and 2 mugs of coffee. He could deduce that April was still angry with him from the one-word answers and her stout refusal to discuss their relationship. But there was something in the way she refused to look at him that made him fear she'd finally realized he wasn't worthy of her love. "If she won't let me tell her, I'll show her," thought Connor, scrubbing and cleaning into the wee hours. The worst of the mess had been cleared by the time April collapsed onto the couch 4 hours later. "That's it. I'm done," she said, her voice husky with tiredness. "You can barely keep your eyes open," he said gently. "You should sleep." She shook her head weakly, her eyelids fluttering closed before she snapped them open, fighting fiercely to stay awake. "I've got to fix this. It's my B&B. I'll take care of it myself." Connor knew he was taking a gamble, but when he reached for her hands, this time she didn't push him away. "I don't even have the strength to walk home," she moaned, a yawn shuddering through her body. Up close, he could see how bloodshot her eyes were. He would have carried her there if she'd let him. "I'll drive you to the cottage," he said, talking over her protests. "Have a power nap, I'll set an alarm, and we can get back to work early." Common sense prevailed, and she let him take her home. She stumbled as she kicked off her shoes at the cottage, but Connor caught her arm and gently righted her. She shuffled to the bedroom, then turned. "Are you coming in?" "I've got a little left in the tank. I'll keep going." "Don't forget to set the alarm," she said, her voice thick with tiredness. "And Connor?" His breath caught in his chest. "Yeah?" "Thank you." Those 2 words kept Connor powering on until his eyes wouldn't stay open any longer. It felt like the entire Lord of the Dance troupe was tap dancing on his brain when he woke an hour or so later on the wine-stained couch. He blinked against a bright light, trying to establish why the ceiling light was strobing in his vision when he'd only sat down to rest for a moment. Thankfully, the teens had been too intent on their alcohol to fuss with coffee, and Connor heaped spoonfuls of coffee into a mug as the magpies heralded in the new day and the new year. The shrill ring of the phone came when he was draining his third cup of instant. "Happy New Year's, buddy! Need anything from the mount before we head back?" Connor quickly filled Fergus in on the situation. Lauren jumped onto speakerphone with suggestions, and when they ended the call, Connor felt a little better, knowing reinforcements were on their way. The pot plant was soon back in its rightful spot in the window of the bathroom, and the tiles shone under the influence of a soapy mop. At least one room is square again. He looked out the window for signs of life at the winemaker's cottage, but the curtains were still drawn. April needed all the sleep she could get. Although he was tired, Connor was certain he would weather it better than April, and silenced his alarm without waking her. Another hour will do her the world of good.
My twig fence!
Connor heard Archie before he spotted him at the foot of the herb garden, a basket of linen in his arms, and went to greet him. The boy looked horrified by the trampled garden. "I know, buddy. Things got a bit out of hand here," Connor said, taking the basket. Archie fixed Connor with a doubtful look.
You don't look so good either.
Connor had caught a glimpse of his bloodshot eyes and dark circles when he'd washed his face earlier, and knew Archie's assessment was an understatement. "I've had better days, but we could do with another set of muscles, and I reckon you fit the bill." Archie beamed. "Nice jumper, by the way." The football guernsey almost came to Archie's knees, but it was a vast improvement on the faded red, blue and yellow singlet he normally wore.
Thanks, said Archie. Dad got it for me for Christmas, and he said I can use the old one for next year's scarecrow competition. I can have twin scarecrows.
Connor smiled wearily. "I can't wait to see you, mate." Rupert rounded the corner with a takeaway coffee and familiar brown bags from the Penwara bakery. Connor gratefully accepted the sustenance. "Daniel's on his way back from the city," said Rupert, "and Felicity sends her apologies. She's a bit under the weather from the cocktail party last night. She's packed supplies, though. There's enough throw rugs in our house to sink a ship," Rupert said, gesturing to Archie's basket. "So there should be something in there to hide the wine stain. And she's got spare quilts and pillows on standby if needed." Connor wasn't quite sure how word had spread so quickly, but within the hour, a handful of locals had materialised to help whip the place into shape. Jean set up her mobile coffee van behind the bed and breakfast. Daniel used the tractor to clear all traces of the bonfire. Archie worked alongside Rupert on the damaged entryway, showing his dad how to select just the right rocks for just the right spot, and Fergus and Lauren arrived at 10 a.m. with Phoebe in tow. "What can we do?" Fergus said. Connor gave them instructions, barely able to contain a yawn. "But only if you're sure you're okay. You guys have been flying all night. And Phoebe, are you sure you should be here?" "By the looks of things, we got a lot more sleep than you, mate," said Fergus, giving him a critical up and down. "You should have a kip." "And I woke up fine, Con," said Phoebe. "Migraine all gone, thank God. I'll get started." Phoebe followed Fergus to the overflowing rubbish bins. Lauren looked over to the winemaker's cottage and then back to Connor. "April's still asleep? She'll be ropeable if she knows we're all working and she's not." Connor ran his fingertips along his eyebrows, massaging his eyes. "She's shattered," he said eventually. "I think I messed things up and I don't want to double down on it by pushing her." Lauren rested a hand on his arm, frowning. "You love her though, right? No bullshit, no caveats or clauses." "Caveats or clauses?" Connor nodded, puzzled. "I do." "I'm sure it's just a mix-up, but last time we spoke she said something about Phoebe and chopsticks. Fergus has sworn black and blue you wouldn't, but if you're dicking her around, I want to know, Connor, before I march in there and talk some sense into my hard-headed friend." Chopsticks? Connor's stomach sank when he realised April must have seen him and Phoebe playing the piano together. "But that wasn't—" Another yawn slipped out. It was getting harder and harder to string a sentence together. He shook his head. trying to unfog his sleep-deprived brain. Lauren patted his arm.
You know what? We're both going to the winemaker's cottage, and you are going to get an hour's shut-eye minimum. Whatever's going on with April, she's not going to want you trashing yourself.
But, Lauren cut him off.
You've done an amazing job, Connor. Look around you.
He turned to see the rising sun casting long shadows across the grass, the place almost back to square, and their friends working together.
I don't know exactly how bad it was last night, but I can tell you've spent nearly every waking hour between now and then trying to fix it, she added gently.
Connor looked at his watch. The event hire van would be pulling into the driveway in an hour and a half. The lunch guests were due at midday, and he needed to be on the ball when they arrived. April, Lloyd, Fran, and Lacewing were depending on him. Okay, he conceded. Just 1 hour. April woke to Mishka's paw on the blankets, accompanied by a whine indicating she was overdue for the toilet. Memories of last night came rushing back, followed by a flood of heartache at Connor's betrayal. All those months of hard work, all those years of dreaming about the B&B, and the loss of the future she'd been so excited about just a few days earlier. Oh, Mish, everything's ruined, she moaned, dragging her broken heart out of bed. Her hands hovered on the curtain cord, delaying the moment she'd have to face the music. She had to call the Destination SA crew to cancel the event, or beg them to switch venues to Winkland Wines. It was harder to know which was worse, cancelling altogether or imposing on their neighbours at such late notice. Plus one look at the Winklands' shiny tasting room, and they might never book another event at Lacewing Estate again. What a horrid, horrid start to the new year. April was staring at the lounge room curtains, gathering her courage, when there was a knock on the door. Lauren barged in before she had time to answer.
Good, you're up,
Lauren said, a sympathetic look on her face as she drew April into a hug.
Now get in that shower. We've got a long lunch to host.
April shook her head. I can't. It's a wreck. Didn't you see it on the way in? The fence is ruined, the stables are trashed. It's a nightmare. Ignoring the tears that sprang to her eyes, she swallowed the lump in her throat, gesturing to the phone plugged in on the kitchen bench. I need to call everyone and cancel. Lauren shook her head and stepped aside. April's heart flipped at the sight of Connor behind her, the ache turning to concern at the sight of him. He looked every bit as bad as she felt. Maybe even worse.
Your fabulously talented Mr. Fix-It here has been working through the night, and he's dead on his feet, so we need a change of guard. Hop in the shower and I'll find you clothes while this guy takes a power nap.
Lauren marched into the bathroom, and April could hear her turning on the shower, but she couldn't look away from Connor. Did you really? I'm sorry. They spoke at once, then stopped. Connor's sad smile was overtaken by a yawn, and even in his tired state, she felt the tiniest seed of hope sprout in her chest. It's not completely ruined? He shook his head and was about to say more when Lauren bustled back into the lounge room, steering April by the shoulders to the steamy bathroom.
You in here and you in there, Connor, she said, pointing to the bedroom. I've got a good feeling there'll be plenty of time for talking later. I'll see you back at Kookaburra Cottage in an hour.
A soft snoring came from the bedroom when April emerged from the shower, and she couldn't resist peering through the door. Connor hadn't even undressed or climbed under the covers before falling asleep. Lying on her side of the bed, one hand curled under her pillow, the other holding a handful of blanket, he looked as handsome and vulnerable as ever. His fair hair was tousled, his clothes rumpled like her unmade bed, and she knew if she traced a fingertip along his jaw, the bristles would rasp against her skin. She pulled a knitted blanket over his body and let him sleep. Had he really worked through the night? It felt like too much to hope that he'd really fixed the chaos, but stepping outside, she discovered he had indeed pulled off a small miracle. Fergus was upending a mop bucket on the lawn, and Rupert and Archie were hard at work on the rock wall. Lauren had her hands around a rake, smoothing out new mulch from the look of things, and Phoebe, even Phoebe, was carting garbage bags of rubbish to Fergus's ute. April felt more ashamed than ever. She'd thrown her hands into the air and given up, and everyone else had soldiered on in her absence. Where do I start? She wondered. Adapting Fran's adage about tackling the hardest task first, she sought out Phoebe by Fergus's ute. Thanks for helping. It's the least I can do, Phoebe said. I'm useless when a migraine hits, like last night, but it's gone now, thankfully. Connor was an angel. I'd still be in the fetal position if he hadn't dropped around with supplies. Phoebe and Connor. Coming between them was like trying to defy gravity. April studied the rock wall in the distance, trying to find joy in the way the sunshine gave the paddock rock a honey tone. At least I have my friends, the stables, the vines, and my family. Somehow I'll just have to make them enough. She took a shaky breath, so desperate for coffee that she began to imagine the scent of it on the breeze. I'm sure you'll be happy with Connor's newfound cooking skills too, April said softly. Phoebe stared at her for a long while, then turned to look towards the stables. I've booked my ticket home. April exhaled slowly. She'd accepted that she couldn't stand in their way any longer, but she hadn't prepared herself for Connor leaving already. Maybe it was better this way, like ripping off a Band-Aid instead of a slow, painful goodbye. Determined to cling to some dignity, April forced a smile. So when are you leaving? Tonight, if you don't mind me stealing Connor for one last errand. I'll fly out from Mount Gambier. One last errand? But, April said carefully, when's Connor leaving? He's not, Phoebe said, puzzlement crossing her elegant features. April looked at her in disbelief. He's staying and you're going? She didn't care that she sounded like an imbecile. April was done with assumptions. Connor's staying in Penwara? Phoebe nodded. As far as I know, he loves it here. Her eyes returned to the ute load of rubbish. I shouldn't have come. I knew he was falling for you and I panicked. I haven't seen him care about anyone as much as you. He loves you, April, and... She gulped, her words stiff. I knew that, and I came anyway. I'm sorry. Could it really be true? It was too much to hope for, and yet... April shook her head, still speechless. Phoebe didn't look like she was lying. Mishka bounded around the corner, her wriggly excitement breaking the tension. I'm not really a dog person, but she's like sunshine with fur, isn't she? Said Phoebe, bending down to give Mishka a pat. I'd better keep going with these dustbins. Connor said you've got guests coming soon. The coffee van's just packing up if you need caffeine. April gave Phoebe a stunned smile, then followed her nose around the back of the stables to find Jean's retro coffee van with its pink and white Duco. Jean unlocked the awning and opened it again when she saw April approaching. I thought I'd fed and watered everyone, but you sure look like you could do with an extra strong one. Must have been a shock coming home to that last night. April nodded, still processing Phoebe's words. Jean studied her as she ground the coffee beans. And I think I owe you an apology. There was something unnerving about Jean offering an apology. In all the years April had known her, she'd thrown in her all without waiting to be asked for advice, matched couples that didn't even know they were looking for love, and doled out well-intended but sometimes unsubtle hints with every cup of coffee she sold, just like last night. Righto. I may have been hasty about Connor. After seeing how that last bloke knocked your confidence, I thought someone outside the wine industry would be a safer bet. But when Connor called this morning at the crack of dawn and asked me to come down, I realised maybe he was the right one all along. I've been watching him work his little butt off for this place. He's no fly-by-nighter, that's for sure. And it turns out, sometimes I get things wrong. April took the coffee, willing the hot brew to clear her racing thoughts. Could it really be that simple? The alarm felt like it had been set for 5 minutes, not 60. Connor fumbled with his watch until it stopped chiming, then buried his head in the pillow a moment longer, taking in the familiar fragrance of cherries and wild plum. When he opened his eyes, he noticed he was huddled on April's side of the bed, covered in the soft blanket that normally lived on the couch. The events of the last 48 hours came rushing back to him, and Connor staggered to his feet. He needed coffee and food fast if he was going to make it through the rest of the day. The vanilla slice was untouched in the fridge, exactly where he'd left it last night, and he ate a banana while making a coffee on April's espresso machine. After a splash of cold water on his face, a spray of deodorant, and a quick once-over with his toothbrush, he felt a little more human. He found everyone outside helping Rupert and Archie with the stone wall. They'd made great progress in the hours since he'd last seen it, but even with the extra helpers, he could see they wouldn't have it finished in time.
Big job,
said Lauren, stopping for a swig of water. She passed the water bottle to Fergus, who took a long drink and then tipped the rest over his head.
It took us weeks to build, said Archie. We're never going to have it fixed before the lunch guests get here.
As if to prove the point, the event hire truck turned into the driveway. "Where am I setting this up?" the driver asked through his open window. He was followed by a small grey Tesla, and Connor recognised the event planner, Luke. Luke's jaw dropped as he climbed out of the car and looked around. April dusted off her hands, and sensing her hesitation, Connor walked across to join her. "It'll be all right," he said, reaching for her hand and feeling relieved when she took it. "The B&B is back in order. We've almost got the exterior sorted, and if all else fails, I've got a backup plan. Can you trust me? Please." He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, and although her response was only a fraction more pressure, he took comfort in the fact she hadn't shied away from his touch like the previous night. He watched her give instructions to the delivery driver, noticing the way she'd pulled herself together in such a short space of time, and then explained the situation to the event planner. "I think," Connor said softly when the truckie was busy unloading chairs and Luke went to fetch his supplies, "we need to talk." April grimaced, her eyes searching his. "We don't have enough time to cover all the ground we've hopped, skipped, and jumped over in the last few days. I really appreciate everything you've done, Connor, and I've been doing a lot of thinking." She trailed off, and he could hear the "but" coming. If they'd still been holding hands, she would have felt his palms go clammy. "I'm not sure we can make this work, Connor. You've got a whole life back in England, a family that will only miss you more as time goes on. And then there's Phoebe. It's been playing on my mind for a while now. We're kidding ourselves if we think we can gloss over that." Her words were so final, so thought out, and from the set of her jaw, you could see she hadn't made the decision lightly. "Come on, you two, we could do with a hand over here," called Fergus, frowning. And while he didn't miss the elbow in the ribs Fergus got from Lauren, Connor was somewhat relieved the Scotsman had saved him from embarrassing himself any further in front of them all. April turned back to the delivery driver, and Connor kept his eyes on the dusty car park as he returned to the rock pile, woodenly passing the paddock rocks to Archie and Rupert. "I hate to see it, mate," Fergus murmured under his breath, "but you looked like a stunned mullet over there. Maybe get some more sleep before you go in for another deep and meaningful. Or come up with a game plan in advance." "I'm all out of game plans," Connor admitted, feeling at a loss for a way forward. He saw the winery windows winding open one by one as April moved around inside, airing the place out. From the depths of the cellar, he caught the strains of classical music, and a kernel of a last-ditch attempt to help smooth things over came to mind. "Archie, you're right about the stone fence. We're not going to get it done in time, but maybe we can divert the guests' attention instead." His words coming out in a rush, Connor explained his idea to Rupert, then headed towards Fergus's ute with Archie. Phoebe caught up with them just before they left. "Can I hitch a ride back to the golf course?" she asked, slipping into the back seat. "I've got a bit of packing and cleaning to do before I go. Still okay for a lift later, Con?" Connor nodded, though he had no idea how he'd stay awake for the drive to Mount Gambier.
Are you going home for good, Phoebe?
Archie asked, turning in his seat as they drove along the Riddoch Highway. She laughed. I think you get along just fine with Nell and Pippin, as subtle as a sledgehammer. But yes, my time here is up. Too much sunshine around here anyway, she said, catching Connor's eye in the rearview mirror. Connor smiled back tiredly. He wasn't sure what the future held with April, but he knew without a doubt that he'd turned the final page in this chapter with Phoebe. He paused at the rental long enough to fish out his suit from the back of the wardrobe, and with a quick wave to Phoebe, they headed up the highway to the Winklands, where Archie raced inside to find the electric piano.
Hurry up, Con! We still need to set it all up,
Archie panted when they were back in the ute. Fergus and Lauren had been busy in their absence, with the worst of the rock wall damage shielded by banners advertising Lacewing Estate, Winkland Wines, and the Beasley Brothers Winery Fergus worked out. Where shall we put it, Arch? The young boy looked at the parking area he'd helped Connor and April revitalise, pointing to a spot on the new paving, between the rose garden and the dinner plate dahlias.
There,
Archie said, setting down the stool, dragging across an extension cord, and helping Connor settle the instrument into just the right place. Connor heard a car slowing on the highway and pressed the power button on the electric piano. He tapped the keys tentatively as the BMW rolled into the entryway. Get it over and done with, he told himself. The first few songs will be the hardest. Connor's mouth felt dry, and he had to force his shoulders down and back. He ran an unsteady hand down his white shirt. A lot of water had passed under the bridge between his last public performance and now, but he had the muscle memory. He had the skill. He just needed the confidence. Let's do this. The music felt jerky at first, the pressure growing as his audience increased.
It's working, Con,
Archie whispered, turning the sheet music for Connor as he continued to the next piece.
Keep going.
And just as he'd hoped, the guests arriving for the long lunch gravitated to the piano instead of stopping to admire the rock wall and noticing its imperfections. Ladies in strappy dresses, shawls and heels, men in dark, well-tailored suits, and even the head of Destination SA stopped to sip wine by the piano on the way inside. When thoughts of the accident and Xavier arose, or the fear that his best efforts might not be enough to win April back, Connor closed his eyes, blocking out the worries along with the audience, and let the music flow through his fingers and onto the keyboard. By the time the last guest had headed inside, the back of Connor's suit felt hot enough to fry an egg, the bare skin on his neck tinged with sunburn, and his fingers were trembling from the exertion. Connor mightn't have been able to fix the rock wall in time, but the diversion had been worth every minute of his discomfort. 23. April looked from the ocean to Beachport's foreshore rotunda, where swimmers were toweling off after their morning dip, parents were laying out picnic rugs, and bather-clad children were huddled in groups beside coloured flags and swimming instructors. The week since New Year's Eve had passed quickly. Lucky we're not in a hurry. Those queues are out of control, said Lauren, scanning the busy foreshore and the crowded jetty cafe. The small seaside village was bustling with holidaymakers cluttering the streets. I'll grab the donuts if you get the coffee, April suggested. She watched Lauren dodging children on bicycles and pedestrians with fishing rods as she crossed the road. Zipping up her jacket, April led Mishka towards the rotunda and the iconic Lions Club donut van. The line was peppered with tourists and locals alike, all eager for a bag of warm, sugary donuts on the chilly summer's day. And from the sound of the parents lining up beside her, the sweet treats were the bargaining tool of choice for reluctant swim students. This one's for your brother, but as soon as your lesson's done, Denise and Karen will cook you a fresh batch, okay? No, just one, kiddo. You'll turn into a donut if you eat more than one a day.
Remember to use your manners and bring me back the change.
The joy of swimming lessons, right? April said, casting a sympathetic smile at the father standing beside her while she waited for her donuts to cook. He looked vaguely familiar, and it wasn't until he lifted the small girl from his shoulders and stooped to hand her a $10 note that April recognized him. Hadn't Jean mentioned a great-nephew? April had run away too quickly on New Year's Eve before the consummate matchmaker could fully pitch her latest proposition, but she was sure this was the bloke helping Jean with the coffee van. I'll never forget the freezing summers when we had to do swimming lessons, rain, hail or shine. I see the point in teaching kids to read the sea from a young age, but I'd be stuffed without bribery to sweeten the deal. You're Jean's nephew, Jack? I'm April. He gave her a shrewd look. Nowhere to hide in a small town like Beachport, is there? April's laugh sounded foreign to herself after a miserable week moping around the winery, trying to get her head straight. Perhaps if your auntie wasn't Jean, you'd have a better chance at lying low. How old's this little one? Jack's smile softened. Harriet's 5, going on 50. She's only been in the district a few weeks, and she's already charming the socks off the locals. They both watched as the little girl returned with a bulging bag and change.
Denise gave me an extra one,
she whispered with a toothy grin.
Would you like it?
She turned her wide blue eyes on April, holding out the bag. Mishka snuffled forward, offering her services in dealing with excess donuts. Pulling the retriever to her side, April shook her head. I've ordered my own, but thanks anyway, she said, returning the girl's smile. Nice to meet you both. April watched them walking away, hand in hand, before her name was called to collect her order. See, I told you sugar, salt air and sunshine would be just the ticket. You're smiling more already, Lauren said with satisfaction, handing her a takeaway cup of coffee and sitting down on the sand beside her. April pointed out Jack and Harriet. I'm not sure why Jean thought I'd be ready for a package deal. I can barely control this heffalump, she said, patting Mishka's head, let alone a 5-year-old. Lauren shaded her eyes and squinted in their direction. She was right on the handsome stakes, though. His kid's just as cute as him. April elbowed her gently. I'll tell Fergus that, will I? Nothing wrong with looking, my friend. And I'm not sure Fergus and I are the perfect match after all. What? Her friend had stayed at the winemaker's cottage more nights than not since New Year's, but April had assumed it was to keep her company and lift her spirits. Was it something on your holidays? Do we hate him? April bit her lip, mortified she'd completely missed this new development. We definitely don't hate him, Lauren laughed. He's a nice bloke, and I know he'll make someone happy with hordes of kilt-wearing, bagpipe-playing kids, but he's way too laid-back and casual for me. I'll give it a few more weeks, but I think we're better off as friends. Why am I only hearing about this now? Lauren nudged her back good-naturedly. You've been a little preoccupied. Now, I know you said you didn't want to talk about it, but now you've got caffeine and sugar in your system, tell me what's happening with you and Connor. Fergus said he's as miserable as you, moping around the place with those big cow eyes. Phoebe's gone. He said he's only interested in you, and he even made you a vanilla slice, which is more than I can say for any man I've ever dated. What more do you need? Mishka's tail thumped on the sand as a family walked past, the children holding swirls of bright pink fairy floss on sticks. April's mind immediately leaped to Connor and Phoebe, and their wealth of New Year's Eve memories. It had been 2 days since she'd received the last message from him. 6 days since she'd watched him pour his heart out on the piano in the dusty winery car park, under the blazing sun. The reviews had made special mention of Connor's impromptu performance, and she understood why. She hadn't been able to drag her eyes away from him either. She had felt cowardly, watching him through the winery window, and knowing the toll it must be taking on him to perform in front of an audience. And yet she'd felt too numb, too intent on keeping her carefully constructed walls in place to acknowledge his effort. And a week later, it was taking everything she had to maintain those wavering walls that protected her heart. I don't know what I need, April said truthfully. Surely it'll hurt less the longer I keep my head down. Lauren clicked her tongue, disagreeing, but before she could elaborate, a familiar towel-clad, wetsuited swimmer appeared in front of them. Geraldine! Why doesn't it surprise me that you're one of the mad ones? Said Lauren. Geraldine gave a cheerful laugh, reaching back to unzip her wetsuit. Given this sad attempt at sunshine, it's probably warmer in the water than it is out, she said, easing her shoulder from the suit. Hard to believe I used to be scared of the ocean. I can't imagine you being scared of anything, April said. I'll never be Lisa Curry Kenny, replied Geraldine. But it turns out I'm not the worst swimmer in the group, and you only swim as far as you fancy, whether that's the entire length of the jetty or just to the pontoon. I suppose you're never too old to admit you were wrong, or to learn something new. Lauren gave April another nudge in the ribs.
Much better than burying your head in the sand.
Ah, yes. Geraldine's kind look made April's eyes prickle. How are you holding up? I've missed having you and Connor in the kitchen. April stretched out her legs on the sand, wondering if everyone on the foreshore could see that the mention of his name cut through her like a knife. She didn't miss the silent exchange between her two friends. Lauren got to her feet, taking Mishka to the water's edge. I loved watching you renovate those stables, April, and I've seen how determined you were to learn how to cook once you'd got over the I can't do this stage. So it surprises me that you're pushing Connor away. You two were a great couple. I'd have thought that was worth fighting for. It wasn't anything Lauren hadn't already told her, but somehow the words held more weight coming from Geraldine. It's not so straightforward, April said, looking down at the sand. He and Phoebe have so much history. Even though she's left, Phoebe still loves him, and I've been cheated on before. I can't risk that happening again. So you don't love him? April felt a sad smile cross her lips. I do, she admitted, but I can't leave Lacewing Estate, and I can't ask Connor to give up his family, his entire life, on the off chance that maybe we'll work out. It's better to treat it like a lovely fling than let myself get hurt again. I find it hard to believe he'd have been unfaithful to you. You both seemed pretty invested to me. April kicked at a clump of seaweed, avoiding Geraldine's intent gaze. She didn't have a mixing bowl or an apron to hide behind here, nor did she have the tugging, wriggling distraction of Mishka to focus on. Connor had made it clear in his text messages that nothing had happened between him and Phoebe, but still. For what it's worth, April, I think you've got a lot to offer in a relationship, in a business, and in our little community. I know Archie Winkland wouldn't have a fraction of the confidence in the garden without your guidance. You prefer the horticulture and events side of vineyard work, and Connor's a gun winemaker. Imagine the type of future you two could have with that pool of talent and resources. Sounds like a recipe for winery success, if you ask me. April closed her eyes. It wasn't that she hadn't seen that future too. The problem was that she had, in all its technicolor glory. She'd already pictured the sunsets they'd watched together at the 10-mile beach. In her head, she'd tasted the wine they'd made, heard their brood of unruly children playing tag between the rows of grapes, and felt the warmth of his arms around her as they surveyed their place in the vines. With a shake of her head, April opened her eyes and focused on the waves lapping at the jetty pylons. There was no one to blame, and the quicker she accepted it, the quicker she could start getting over him. He'll always call England home, and even if Connor wanted to stay, he mightn't be able to get residency. And he's already got recruiters in the UK after him, April said. I can't offer that. I spend most of my working week gardening, not winemaking, and Dad's version of retirement is being carted out of the vineyards in a casket. It'll be years before I take over, and even then... She trailed off. Geraldine gave a gentle laugh, as if she could see right through April's guff. Do you really think Connor would only have you if your winery was an implicit part of the deal? April lifted one shoulder. Some people would consider that an attractive prospect. Some people, but not Connor. She knew it, and Geraldine knew it, but instead of calling her out, the older woman simply studied the ocean with a peaceful expression on her face. Lauren wandered back with Mishka. You two look like you're pondering the world's problems. April's just getting my 2 cents worth, Geraldine chuckled. Sometimes you need to put yourself first and take a risk. April watched the fishing boats bobbing in the distance and the dozens of children following their instructors through the waves near the shoreline. Could she trust her own heart when she'd been so badly let down before? And even if she took Geraldine's advice, had she left it too late? What do you say to a pub lunch, Connor? I still haven't thanked you for watching the winery while Fran and I were away. Not to mention doing the hard yards with those ruddy gate crashers, Lloyd said, emerging from the cellar on a cool mid-January day. Connor shook his head, knowing that the pub's finest Scotch fillet steak with mushroom sauce would probably taste like cardboard in his current state. He hadn't felt like eating much or sleeping much over the last fortnight, and his body wasn't thrilled about the mistreatment. I'm all good, Lloyd, thanks anyway, he said, mustering up a smile before turning back to his work. You look like you could do with feeding up. How about I bring you back a pizza from the Bushman's Inn? They do a mean wood-fired mushy and rocket. Connor knew that Lloyd felt bad about the chill that had settled between him and April, but try as he might, there was nothing he or Lloyd or even Fran could do. The ball was completely in April's court, and although he'd stopped glancing up every time the cellar door opened or his phone buzzed, he still held out hope that maybe she could move past their tumultuous start to the year. Despite Connor's assurances he wasn't hungry, when Lloyd returned half an hour later, he came bearing pizza and news. The insurance company's approved an amount for the damages to the bed and breakfast, and we've got a formal apology from the kid who organised the party. His folks are making him volunteer at the wildlife sanctuary for the rest of the summer, said Lloyd, reading aloud from the letter. So he'll be knee-deep in wombat and kangaroo poo, washing pouches for the joeys and possums, and mixing up milk and medicine for injured and orphaned animals. Sounds like a reward, not a punishment, Connor said, taking a slice of the pizza from the box to satisfy Lloyd. He knew Nell would auction off the family's concert trophies and her eye teeth for undivided time at a wildlife shelter. Says here the little bugger didn't actually invite all those yahoos. He booked the stables under a false name, no doubt in that, but apparently word got out through social media and it spread like a bushfire. That gels with what Heidi said too. Connor didn't have much sympathy for the kid after the carnage at Kookaburra Cottage, but still, he knew a thing or two about best-laid plans. When Connor arrived at the Winklins' house later that afternoon for Archie's piano lesson, his young student was in an upbeat mood, and it took several attempts to divert the conversation from Lego, lambs, a new obsession with photography, football, and the burgeoning veggie patch before he settled enough to play. Try that piece again, Arch, said Connor, flipping the sheet music back to the start. When he looked up next, Rupert was leaning against the doorframe. You're nailing it, mate, Rupert said. Archie spun around, basking in the praise, and played it again, more confidently this time. They've come a long way, these two, Connor thought, pleased to see them more comfortable in one another's presence.
Hey, Con,
Archie said when Rupert had gone back to his office.
want to come see the lambs when we're done? They're all penned up for shearing. I can show you how the veggie patch is going too if you've got the time.
Connor was touched by the invitation. It would be better than rattling around the winery after dark, or feeling like a third wheel at the golf course rental. Not that Fergus and Lauren ever made him feel unwelcome. They'd been more than understanding about his moping. But there was a funny vibe between them recently, and the fishing shows Fergus was now obsessed with evoked too many memories of their trip to the 10-mile beach, and his night in the dunes with April. Lead the way, Arch. They headed outside into the late afternoon, where the sun was trying its best to shine through the clouds. From the ants marching across the limestone gravel and the cockies shrieking in the trees, Archie deduced it would rain overnight.
Mishka always knows when there's thunder on the way too. The moment she scurries under the garden shed, you can tell there's a storm coming.
Connor had only been to the Winklands shearing shed once before, when lamb marking was underway, but he was pretty sure the fairy lights adorning the outside of the shed were a new addition. The shearing shed's all glammed up. Don't tell me your dad's onto the long launchers bandwagon. He hated to think what that type of venue rivalry would mean for Lacewing Estate. Archie's eyes darted to the fairy lights and then back to him.
It's a good distraction for the lambs when we're shearing and crutching.
Connor laughed, only 90% sure Archie was taking the mickey as he climbed the worn timber steps. It hadn't been a hot week, but he could imagine how warm the shed would be inside with dozens of sheep and a team of shearers, wool classes, and roustabouts. A ute pulled up alongside the shearing shed just as they reached the heavy tin sliding door. Daniel leaned out the window. "Jump in, Archie. I need a hand for 5 minutes."
"Just give the door a good pull, Con. I'll be back soon,"
said Archie with a grin, ducking under Connor's arm. His boots clattered as he took the steps 2 at a time. With a wave and a toot, Dan and Archie disappeared down the driveway, leaving a perplexed Connor standing outside the shearing shed door. With a shrug, he slid the door open, but instead of penned sheep and shearing prep, there was a tablecloth over the wool-classing table, set with candles and a feast. Wow. Connor turned slowly to appreciate the rustic charm. Fairy lights hung from the dark timber beams, Duke Ellington played on a small stereo, and vases of gum leaves were dotted around the vast space. "Do you like it?" Looking over his shoulder, Connor was lost for words. April wore a red evening gown that dipped at the bust and flared at the knees, her long, dark hair pinned up on top of her head. And although high heels would have been the normal accompaniment for such a show-stopping gown, instead she wore a pair of R.M. Williams boots. Connor dug his fingernails into his palm, certain he was imagining things. But when he looked down at the half-crescent marks in his hand, and then back up again, she was still there, looking as beautiful as ever, with the shearing shed looking like a scene from Farmer Wants a Wife, and the candlelight bringing out the caramel tones in her dark hair. "I love every bit of it," he said quietly, "especially the woman standing there in the RMs." She clasped her hands together and noticed they were shaking. "I'm sorry it's taken me so long, Connor. It's been a lot to get my head around." Stepping closer, he nodded, aching for her to skip to the part he hoped was coming next. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You're here, I'm here, and I'm really hoping this all—" he lifted his hands, gesturing at the rustic shed around them— "means we're going to be okay." Reaching for his hand, April slid her fingers between his. "I came so close to losing everything that night, Connor. Kookaburra Cottage, the long lunch gig, our relationship. I know that, logically, the only reason everything didn't fall apart was because of you." She managed a shaky breath, her eyes clouding with anguish. "But I was scared, Con. I didn't mean to put my walls up again, especially after everything you did to convince me otherwise, but it felt like the safe choice." April paused. "I need to know that you're not leaving Australia the minute your visa expires, and that you're sure of how you feel, for me and for Phoebe. Can you see a long-term future for the two of us, here in the Limestone Coast?" It was a question he'd considered many times in the last few months, and he already knew the answer. "I was hoping you'd ask me that," he said, holding her eye. "I love you, April. And I'd like that very, very much." A slow smile crossed her lips. She ducked her head, then looked back up at him. "Then, if you'll still have me, I'm ready to jump in, boots and all." Things once again felt right in the world when April leaned into him, one hand on his chest, while the other tugged him closer, nuzzling into his neck. "I'm more than ready," Connor replied, gently lifting her chin until their lips collided. His hand skimmed the silky fabric around her waist, reacquainting him with the curves of her body, and their tender kiss deepened. A knock came at the sliding door, and they reluctantly pulled apart.
"Delivery for Miss Lacey and Mr. Jameson,"
called Archie, sliding open the door and slipping an esky through the gap.
"Over and out."
His boots clattered down the steps again, followed by the sound of Daniel's ute leaving, and then it was just the two of them with the jazz playing softly. "I roped in a few helpers," April admitted, "though the cooking's all mine, and while I'm not sure the dessert can beat your amazing vanilla slice, it's all made with love. Shall we?" Still holding his hand, April carried the esky to the table. Inside there was a mound of mixed berries and peaches on a bed of cream and a white, crusty base. "My very first pavlova, made under the extremely watchful eye of Geraldine, It was the most iconic Aussie dish I could think of, she said, suddenly shy again. It might be terrible, but I can vouch for the quiches, sausage rolls, and muffins. He looked at the table as she set down the pavlova, recognizing their favourite dishes from the cooking classes. You best not tell Jean about this. She'll throw in the towel if she realizes people are capable of grand romantic gestures without her influence. April laughed, a sound he wanted to hear again and again and again until they were old and grey. "24. 3 months later." April put a bookmark in her novel and turned her face up to the sun. After a quiet morning in the garden and a quick cleaning session between guests, she had been happy to spend the afternoon in the hammock under the flowering gum trees, with a book in hand, Mishka at her feet, and Connor by her side. And given the intensity of vintage, during which Connor's days and nights had been consumed with harvesting the grapes at just the right time, then wrangling the team of pickers and helping her father get everything into the tanks, it felt like a luxury to have a free weekend. The hammock rocked as Connor reached for his water bottle. "This is exactly what I needed today," he said, taking a sip and passing it to her. "I get the feeling next weekend will be a little different. How many entries have you got planned again?" April stretched, feeling sated by sunshine, and rattled off the categories she was entering in next weekend's Penwara show. "Everything that's growing nicely will make it onto the produce tables, of course," she said, not missing his raised eyebrows. "Of course," he agreed with a grin. "And how about the bacon? Think we can top last year's shockers?" "I know I can," April said, snuggling into his side. The cooler weather had well and truly settled in, and it wouldn't be long before they'd be lighting the wood fires inside the winemaker's cottage and kookaburra cottage. Fran's efforts to fill the tables seemed to be going well this year. Last I heard, Fergus and Lauren were going head-to-head in the scone department. I don't envy Fergus. Lauren always plans to win. Did you see her latest Insta posts? Lauren had been given looser rein on the radio station's social media pages, profiling dozens of Penwara show devotees, from volunteers and committee members to entrants young and old. Between the radio promotions and word of mouth, all signs pointed towards an extraordinary weekend. "Yeah, and she's got Archie a spot on the breakfast show this Wednesday," Connor said, swinging his legs over the side of the hammock and stretching. "Speaking of which, he'll be here any minute to check on his pumpkin. It'll take 3 of us to lift the thing into the ute on show day, especially if it grows another 5 kilos like last week." Connor held out his hands to April. She took them, stealing a kiss before slipping her boots back on. They wandered hand in hand to the vegetable patch. Classical music was floating on the breeze, thanks to Archie, who was convinced it would help the giant pumpkin grow faster. "Judging by the size of the thing, the music therapy's working," said April, waving to their young neighbour as he trotted down the laneway. She left Connor and Archie to inspect the pumpkin and went inside to set about making a batch of strawberry muffins. The specks of strawberries and white chocolate chips, one of her new variations, looked picture-perfect in the pink ceramic mixing bowl Fran had bought her for Christmas. April shuffled a pot plant beside the bowl and snapped a photo for her social media. Baking underway for tonight's guests at Kookaburra Cottage. Don't forget, the B&B is stocked with picnic supplies, so you can share a muffin and a glass of wine amongst the autumn colours in the vineyard with wallabies hopping past, or spread the rug out on the manicured cottage gardens with the scent of fresh herbs and blooms in the air. Hashtag living the dream, hashtag wine country, hashtag mini break. Once the muffins were in the oven and the post uploaded to Instagram, April glanced out the window. It was hard to believe that this time last year, Connor had only just moved to Penwara, and she hadn't the foggiest idea of how to cook, let alone bake for guests at her very own bed and breakfast. She smiled as she watched him gardening with Archie, as if there was nowhere else they'd rather be on a Saturday afternoon. Connor looked up and caught her eye, giving her one of those winks that made her stomach flip-flop. "Love you," she said through the window, a smile deepening as he mouthed the words back to her. April turned the muffins out onto the cooling rack and glanced at the clock. The new guests were due in an hour, and apart from a Zoom call with Connor's family back home, they had the rest of the weekend free to potter around the property, perfect their show entries, and maybe even take a trip to the beach. She lined a basket with a linen tea towel, loaded the baked goodies into it, and carried the tray with the 3 remaining muffins to the door. "Any taste testers available?" Archie scrambled to his feet, dusting the dirt from his hands and knees, then rushing to wash his hands under the tap, while Connor leaned against the pergola. His eyes did a lazy sweep from her boots to her apron, meeting her gaze with an appreciative look. "Ready and willing," he said, his face breaking into a broad grin. Connor shifted the laptop so both he and April could see the screen. The dial tone sounded, and before he knew it, he was gazing at his father's face. "Hiya," Connor said, looping an arm around April's shoulders. "Have we missed Mam's cake?" "We've just found the candles, haven't we, girls?" said Jock. The screen panned across to show Nell and Pippin in the kitchen, with Heidi rifling through the pantry behind them. "Where on earth are the matches?" she asked. Sharon dashed down the corridor, waving as she steered Heidi in the right direction. It was a scene so familiar, so comforting, that he couldn't imagine it ever changing.
"We love the jumpers, Con,"
Pippin called, twirling around so they could see the wombat-themed branding on the back of her hoodie. "They're for a great cause," Connor said, explaining they'd visited the wildlife sanctuary in Mount Gambier after an invitation from the New Year's Eve party planner. The remorseful teenager had signed up to continue his volunteer role, and after apologising yet again for the mayhem he caused at April's property and giving them a tour of the facility, he'd made such a great sales pitch for the merchandise that they had purchased 2 jumpers for the girls, plus 1 for Archie. April bent her head closer. "Happy birthday, Sharon. And did you like the earrings?" Connor's mother leaned into the camera, nodding her head so the earrings flashed in the light.
"Absolutely brilliant, April. Nobody in Derby will have Australian sea glass earrings, I'd wager. We can't wait to see the coastline with our own eyes, though. September can't come fast enough. We're already looking at flights, did Connor tell you?"
Connor felt April nodding beside him. "That's such great news. I'm looking forward to meeting you all properly."
"Can we go to the wildlife shelter too, Con? I want to cuddle a baby Joey,"
Nell said. "I'm pretty sure we can arrange that," he replied. Heidi appeared on screen with a candlelit cake in her hands, and April and Connor joined in for the chorus of Happy Birthday before signing off. "They seem pretty excited about their trip," April said, moving to the kitchen and flicking on the kettle for one last cup of tea before bed. "Maybe we could move into Kookaburra Cottage for a week and they can all stay here." He looked up from the laptop and beamed at April across the room. "That's a great idea." Connor's inbox pinged and he skimmed the email. "Dear Mr. Jameson, re-application for residency in Australia. Thank you for your query about our legal services regarding immigration. Congratulations on taking the first step in the journey. We pride ourselves in making this process as seamless as possible for our clients, so please see below the links to all the information you will need ahead of our initial meeting. In response to your background, I can confirm that someone with your qualifications and experience is indeed a solid fit for the skilled migration program. We look forward to speaking with you in person soon." Connor shut down the program with a single click, feeling more excited about the future than he could have ever imagined. A clever, funny, and creative woman by his side, a community that had welcomed him with open arms, and a place in the vines. He was pretty sure it didn't get much better than that. You've been listening to Kookaburra Cottage by Maya Linnell, narrated by Casey Withers. Published by Wave Sound Audiobooks, an imprint of W.F. Howes Limited. This recording is copyrighted by W.F. Howes Limited.